Hello, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome all of you, even though I don't really see you, but I know how many of you were now online with this new e-forum. So it's a new type of forum for the European Psychiatric Association. It's a kind of a e-forum. The main point is we changed the way of the modalities we do have with the forum because of the COVID. The COVID was a crisis for all of us, and we all had a dramatic change of our practice for the last months, and that is definitely a huge change. One of the impact that had the COVID is the interactions we have with the other mental health workforces. All of the way we were working with the psychologists, the nurses, all the other mental health workforces was completely challenged with this new type of crisis. So we thought that was maybe a very good topic to discuss on, especially as there is a huge change now, but there's also the past and maybe also changes for the future. And the level of interactions between all of us in order to improve the quality of care is one of the very important aspects for the development of how we could enhance the treatments, the care, the follow-up that we propose to patients with mental health disorders. So I'm very happy that we begin this forum on the interaction between mental health workforces during and maybe also before and after the COVID so that we can have a large interaction. My colleague Matt Musion will join us a bit later, representing Gamion. As you know, Gamion is one very important actor within the EPA, but also an independent, very active actor in the field of mental health care in order to improve our way to organize the care that we propose. So he will join us a little bit later. And we are, for this specific forum, very happy to have the introduction of Stella Kyriakides. You know, it's not so frequent that a commissioner is really being part of an aspect of a congress for medical doctors, and in this case for psychiatrists mainly. We really appreciate the commissioner being keen to support us, not only about the reorganization of care for the COVID, but also on this very specific aspect of interaction between mental health workforces. So without any further ado, please have a look about this keynote address from Stella Kyriakides, who's the Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, and I hope you will enjoy the short video that she very kindly sent us a couple of days ago. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to join you today to discuss the mental health consequences of COVID-19 and the implications for society. As a psychologist, I am acutely aware of the potential mental health effects this pandemic has on all of us, especially people in vulnerable settings or circumstances. Mental health is an issue that historically has not received the attention it deserves at EU level. But one of the few positives to come out of the pandemic is an awareness that this needs to change. There is no doubt COVID-19 has changed the world as we knew it, and it has taken a particularly heavy toll on the most vulnerable population groups, the frail and the elderly, those with pre-existing mental and physical conditions, and those for whom staying safe at home exposed them to greater risk or abuse. Many people with mental health problems saw their care discontinued or channeled via online consultations. While e-consultations can offer effective alternatives and the pandemic has triggered real innovation in this area, we know it is not suited to every context or condition. Our health and care professionals have also been profoundly affected by what they have seen and lived through. They have quite rightly received applause and admiration, but many are experiencing anxiety, stress, trauma, and other mental health concerns as a consequence of their frontline work. We must work together to address this. Along with WHO Europe and the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policies, we are monitoring how national health systems respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. But there is a long way to go before we get to the full picture of how health systems, including mental health services, are coping. As we move into the next phase and countries begin to slowly open up, we face new challenges and anxieties. The virus continues to pose a very real threat, but in many places, a new normal is beginning to emerge. In this next phase, we need to process many simultaneous concerns, dealing with the impact of the first wave, taking stock, learning, improving, and planning ahead. We face a kaleidoscope of mental health challenges. How do we support the reopening of schools and help young children and people readjust to life after lockdown? How have confinement measures impacted on frail, older people in care homes, on their families and their carers? How many people with existing mental and physical health concerns have suffered setbacks in their recovery or treatment process? How do we address the reported increases in domestic and child abuse? What if we need to roll back the deconfinement measures at a certain point if we have a resurgence of the virus? And how will we manage mental health impacts? These are just a few of the questions we must answer, and your profession will provide essential support and guidance going forward. As a very practical step, I want to highlight the dedicated network space on COVID-19 mental health support on the Commission's Health Policy platform. Nearly 50 groups have already joined this network from across the European health and social community, and I am delighted that your association is participating too. Looking forward to the next few years, EU support for public health will be massively stepped up with our new EU for Health programme, worth €9.4 billion. This will be a key instrument to support the road ahead. One of the key objectives of EU for Health is to improve the efficiency, accessibility, and resilience of health systems across the board, including mental health. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has reminded us how essential it is to work across disciplines, policies, and professions. You are right to celebrate the fantastic heritage of European psychiatry in this Congress. But we will never be able to vaccinate against the mental health consequences of COVID-19. And it is essential we work together to manage this aspect appropriately. I look forward to learning from your observations and wish you a very successful conference.
So thank you very much for, I hope you enjoy this presentation. I think that we had a wonderful proposal, that we are on a good track, that these collaborations are extremely important, and that we should work on this aspect to improve the quality of interactions we have from different professionals. So you heard about the point that we are developing now this activity as an ambassador for the EPA. So we asked all of you, and you probably received some emails about that, that you accept to fill in a poll where many different types of questions, very short ones, just 5 or 6 minutes, are really about core aspects that we want to have the knowledge on for all clinicians working on mental health forces in Europe. For that, we made the very first wave, and we're very happy then just 24 hours ago, we already had 550 answers. So I'm ready now to share some of the results that we made. And of course, this is completely about the results of this very specific polling. So let me share you my screen, showing how the results are on this aspect, showing some very interesting aspects. So for these ambassador, if you did not yet reply, this is the link. So you have it in our internet and intranet link of the EPA, and you also have it within your app, which was developed by Kenneth for the EPA. So you are also able to participate in that. But for those already making, this is the results we observed. We had for these 2nd of July, more than 500 responses. And I want to congratulate the Irish that were the first country with the most important number of clinicians. As you guess on the left part of the screen, we have mainly psychiatrists and psychiatric trainees, but I'm very happy also that other colleagues are working and participating in this pool. We have a majority of females. The majority of the age is between 30 and 50, and mental health care is usually at hospital or a mixture of hospital and private practice. Not a surprise, this is the usual profile of participants. So that's a very quick glance about the statistics. So we won't get into too much details, but I wanted to show two types of results. We've been asking clinicians all around the world what was the difference between and during the COVID period about the number of patients you saw. So there was a huge range of number of patients, and some of them, for example, are researchers with a very low number of patients seen, and some of them are seeing a lot of patients, but the average was around 100 patients a month. When we look at those being active in April, we see that we have a huge decrease of patients being seen. Nearly half of patients were seen during this period, and we all know that the demand was even more than before. So that's probably having an impact. The other aspect which was interesting is how many of our patients were tested, and only 1 out of 7 were possible to test during the period, which we know was also frustrating. And how we dealt with these infected patients is also interesting. We had 8% of our patients being COVID plus, which is in fact the average in many countries such as Italy, Spain, or France. And what was really interesting, because we've been focusing on this aspect, is that we were able to propose a hospitalization for those who needed it for a psychiatric COVID plus ward, which was specifically meant for these patients in order to protect our patients for spreading the virus. So that's for me also a very interesting news. About the very specific topic of our forum today, what is interesting is that we had the capacity to look at how are the interactions with different mental health workforces, usually and then during the COVID period. And that's the first example with the nurses. I won't get into too much details, but the main idea is just to have a kind of glance. Our interactions with the nurses usually is very important. We have a large majority with a regular and always type of interactions with nurses. And as you can see, during the COVID, there's a little shift for the left, which means we had a real important impact on the way we interact. The second one is about psychologists. Once again, we have a huge level of interactions, maybe a bit lower than nurses, but the impact during the COVID is even larger, with nearly half of our interactions being considered as insufficient during the crisis. When you look at the interactions with physiotherapists, it's a little bit different. We have much less interactions, and this is not a surprise because, for example, not all wards do have physiotherapists, and the impact is even larger for those having, during the COVID period, a level of interactions which is relatively poor. Occupational therapists have a little bit larger interactions usually, and a huge interaction during the COVID. So this is probably one of the interactions which was the most touched upon by the COVID. Interaction with family members is part of life. So of course we have regular and always types of relationship before. And once again, a huge impact during the COVID. Not a surprise, because we know, for example, that visits were forbidden in some aspects. For policymakers, we have a relatively few interactions, and the interactions were also negative, nearly all of them. So just to make it very quick, because I don't want to bother you with many results, but this kind of ambassador activity, asking all of you about some crucial aspect of life, is one way to go for the EPA, and you're going to hear more about that. And it gives us some kind of lessons that are really interesting, and for which I would be extremely interested to have the opinion of those other mental health workforces. just a couple of points that are, I think, quite relevant for these results. High usual interactions with nurses, psychologists, and family members. Interactions with nurses and psychologists were more conserved compared to the other one during the COVID. But nevertheless, even those there were protected, we lost 1/5 of them. So that's definitely right significant. Physiotherapists and occupational therapists had less contact initially, but had a huge impact of the COVID, losing half of this important interaction. The contacts with family members divided by 2 during the COVID, and that's definitely one of the aspects which was dramatic for the COVID. And a third of clinicians have interaction with policymakers, but only a fourth during the COVID. So as you can see there, there's quite a lot of these kind of interaction, which is completely challenged by the aspect of the COVID. I would like now to ask, because we have a little bit of time, Matt, who very nicely joined, if he would be possible to give a welcome word, because with his specific connection types, he might have some difficulty initially. I think that, Matt, you are here. If you want to take the floor to welcome, you will be welcome. If not, it's we will have Matt a little bit later. Matt is somebody with a good assertivity. I'm sure that he will be when he will join, raise a lot of questions and have a lot of interaction. So maybe we can begin as saving a little bit of time, which is unusual and definitely a good point for the organization of our meeting, to begin the discussion with the roundtable discussions, because for me this is the most interesting part of the forum, where we really can have interactions. Don't forget that for all of you, questions and answers are welcome. This is one of the good aspects with these e-forum, where we can collect not only 3 or 4 questions because there's a queue on the mic, but you can send 200 questions. I know that the number of connected people is more than 300. So you have large latitude to raise a question, use the chat, and of course we might not be able to use all of them, but at least try to use the ones that were the most frequently asked by many of you. So please do not hesitate. So if you agree, we could then begin with the Andrew Bittlebank presentation. Andrew is the president of the Union of Medical Specialists, the UEMS, which has, as you know, a very important role in Europe for the organization of our specialty. So if you agree, I will open the file for Andrew, and there share the screen to have the benefit of their participation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philippe. I hope you can hear me clearly?
Absolutely. That's perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Your go.
It's wonderful to be able to participate. I know we're all entering interesting times at the moment and learning new ways of communication. And this is a real joy to be able to speak to you from the sunny northwest of England. Well, actually, it's not sunny; it's pouring with rain, but it always does round here. But I hope everybody else is having a glorious summer. I've got a 5 slides to share with you. And first of all, I'm going to say something about what the European Union of Medical Specialists is. A little bit about what we do and how we do our work, and share then some reflections on how that work is being affected in the light of the COVID pandemic. So first of all, about UEMS. We, as an organisation, represent the Medical Specialists Association to the European Union, very much connected with the project to harmonise standards around Europe, and in our case, particularly standards around medical education, and for us in psychiatry, around psychiatric education. UEMS is composed of a council of national medical associations, which represent each of the countries in the European Union, the European Economic Area, and I should also say sadly, not sadly the United Kingdom participating, but sadly that the United Kingdom is not participating as a full member of the European Union. We are concerned particularly around as I said, the education of medical specialists. And we do this in three ways: by, first of all, setting standards for postgraduate education in all medical specialties, looking at how training is delivered and what the content of training is. Secondly, we look at setting standards for assessments in medical specialties, that is, examinations, postgraduate examinations in particular. And thirdly, we accredit CME activity. And indeed, this conference, I expect, is being accredited through EACME, the European Council for CME. We're organised around medical specialties, as I say, and we recognise 50 medical specialties. I should also say our sister organisation, the Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Section, is one of those other 50 recognised specialties. Each of those specialties is represented through a board, and each section has a board which does the business of the section. The board is composed of delegates from each of the member nations, and increasingly we have observer nations. The influence of Europe is increasing around the world, and that's fantastic to see. So in our recent meetings, we've had input from Russia, from Morocco, and from Egypt, and our influence is widening. Our vision and missions. Well, that's basically what's set out in if we could go back a slide, Philip. Yes, if we could go back another slide. Thank you. That's our vision and our mission. So very much at the heart of what we're talking about this morning, promoting standards of care. We do this through influencing postgraduate and undergraduate training in psychiatry, and contribute to the harmonization of professional standards. Our current business consists of really the content of learning and the how of learning, setting a framework for competencies and for agreeing the training requirements, which is very much how psychiatry is taught and learned, the balance between experiential and theoretical learning, and setting standards for that learning. And those standards very much are based upon widely recognized standards in the community of medical education around the world. The document around training requirements is then agreed by the UEMS Central Council, and to date, almost half of the 50 or so medical specialties in Europe have a training standards document that's been approved by UEMS Council. So let's move to the final slide about how our business is being changed in a post-pandemic situation. And again, looking at the content, the what of learning and the how of learning. I think from reflections from many colleagues around Europe, maintenance of core medical competence has become a major issue. So dealing with the physical health aspects of COVID, as well as the physical health aspects of caring for our patients. New emphases have emerged, with recognition of the traumatic and traumatizing effects of the pandemic. It's estimated that around 20% of patients who've been in ICU will develop PTSD over the course of the following 12 months. There's concern around the emergence of new syndromes, although that's probably not such a big issue. Support for the health and care workforce. Early on in the pandemic, we started to see patients who are medical and nursing colleagues in the acute medical setting who presented with unusual forms of psychosis. And it's estimated that over time, around 50% of the acute workforce will develop anxiety, depression, or PTSD at some point. So a big issue there about how mental health supports the rest of the health and care workforce. We will have issues as we go ahead, looking at the possibility of a second wave of COVID. But then after that, the mental health surge and the mental health impact of not only isolation, but also the economic consequences of COVID. And no doubt, sadly, there will be in many places an increase in the suicide rate. So there's a real need to learn about the public health impact, public mental health impact of such emergencies and crises. And we've all learned an awful lot about how technology might support healthcare delivery, telepsychiatry, and using video consultation, telephone consultation techniques, and supporting other members of the workforce and the mental health workforce in doing that has become very much part of our everyday work. So the how of learning, how's that going to be influenced? Well, I think flexibility is the key, as well as looking at how we enable people to access the experience that's required to deliver the content of learning we described above. As during this crisis, we know that many medical schools stopped clinical placements. There was reduced contact with patient care for both students and trainees. And so it's learning how we might support that clinical learning in a virtual way, using simulation techniques and technology as we go forward. And I think one of the key things that I've learned through this, both as an educationalist and as a practitioner, is the importance of flexibility and flexibility of response to what's happening in the environment. And maybe one of the emphases that we need to look at is the emphasis of capability around our workforce, meta competency rather than competency, learning about learning and learning about delivering service in a new way. So that's it from me. I look forward to joining in the rest of the discussion later. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you. Definitely interesting presentation. The screen is back, I guess. So thank you, definitely interesting part. Andrew, your presentation was really nice. I really share your point that we had a crisis that was really managed for our patients. And the point is, as you raise, probably the second wave on the general public, shutting down the schools, the isolation from the whole population might be in fact the real challenge, much more than the changes of care we proposed during the crisis. So we had this feeling that maybe we missed a little bit the target. It would be a bit different. Do you share this point, and what would be your recommendation for these aspects?
I'm sorry, Philip. The signal cracked up a little bit there, but I heard you say you were looking at the second wave, and particularly the public mental health surge as things go forwards. And I feel a little bit like we're bracing ourselves for the imminent tsunami. One of the things I think we have to do is learn better ways of looking after ourselves and looking after each other as we go forward. So I was talking about providing support for the rest of the health and care workforce, but I think that also applies to the mental health workforce. Very interesting talking with colleagues, increasingly having our multidisciplinary meetings through virtual fora like this. And we're kind of missing the physical contact, the corridor conversation, the informal supportive chat, exchange of information, and so on and so forth. And as we go into the next wave, I think we're going to have to think about how we deliver such things flexibly, not only enabling people to use the technology, but enabling to use the technology effectively to support each other. So I think one of my messages would be about looking after each other.
Thank you, Gilles. Definitely a nice message. I'm sure that we will share it. So thank you very much, Andrew. We will get now to the next speaker, who's Nina Kilku. She's the president of the European Psychiatric Nurses Organization. So one of these interactions that was so important in our survey. So very happy to have Nina on board and have her presentation that I will show very quickly, hopefully. In a couple of seconds. Here we are. Nina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. And first of all, well, to all, which I can't see, have a nice morning, and hopefully you enjoy all this wonderful program. Thank you for the organizers also about the flexibility to organize this conference now online. And I'm really happy to be participating in this one. So I'm actually sending you greetings from Finland, so sorry about my accent on that sense. Philip, could you please put the next slide, please? So I'm presenting Horatio, which is the European Psychiatric and Mental Health Nursing Organization, and we are representing around 20 national associations throughout Europe. So our main task, of course, as a European roof organization is to give the voice to the mental health nurses in different discussions on mental health nursing and mental health in the European level. But of course, we would like to also to support national associations with some of their activities with the resources we have. And in this slide, you can see some of the main cooperative organizations we are actually having cooperations or active discussions with, and one of the biggest one is of course the International Council of Nurses, as we should also remember that this is globally the year of the nurse and midwife, which unfortunately because of the COVID-19 became very different that was planned. We are an active member of Mental Health Europe. We are supporting EUFAMI actions, and we are discussing different issues also with the WHO, especially throughout the ICN at the moment. And we have been also a bit active with the European Council of Bioethics group. So this is just to give you the overview of the organization itself. So I go here point by point. So there are some discussions we have had in the European Mental Health Nursing Organization, and I have gathered some information from our members just briefly. And I am sorry, but I think I probably say some things which Andrew already mentioned, but this is the thing with COVID now, so we are tackling with the same problems everywhere at the moment. So of course, the isolations and need for precautions for every one of us have been a huge emotional burden and stress. And there has been really worries and fears about the infection itself, but also about what is the isolation actually doing to us, as well as the loneliness and anxiety. So Philip, please, the next. and we should also recognize that there is not only a risk factors, but also a lot of protective factors, and we do recognize the resilience factors in individual, family, and community level. And this is just to remind us that we shouldn't kind of medicalize all the reactions if it's not needed. But this is one of the main concerns and issues probably for the future, how we really can assess and evaluate who are in need of more supportive care and who just cope without any professional help actually. We already know, and there has been warning signs like the increase on substance abuse in different countries, increase and estimations of domestic violence in many places, neglect, especially towards the old people, and then an increase, already some increase in suicide rates has been reported. And yet at the same time, in some countries, there has been a kind of underutilization of mental health services. So there has been less contacts to mental health services, like actually Philip already presented after the survey. So people have probably hesitated to come to the services, and this is not a good sign for those who really need our services. And at the same time, the contact with these different helplines have increased in several countries. So there has been also need for more competent mental health professionals working in the helplines, many of them being voluntary there besides their daily work. And then, of course, we recognize some of the vulnerable risk groups. So people with pre-existing health and social problems. For example, if there has been already unemployment and low incomes, and now the whole kind of economical family system might have actually collapsed. So there are really big issues in many families at the moment. The situation with old people, how the isolation have actually and is affecting them and their mental health. What about children and adolescents, especially in the families where there might have been already some problems. So there seems to be now some children and adolescents more who are in caring roles in their families, and of course that is not good. And the children and adolescents might also lack the structure for their day because of the schools were also locked down in some countries. Then we need to have some specific attention for healthcare staff working in the intensive care units, definitely. But it's not the whole story, because there are a lot of healthcare staff working with the infected patients or patients who might be positive also in other healthcare settings, including also mental health services. And they might not have such an experience and know how to work with infected patients like the persons who was in senior level in ICUs. And of course, the last one, but not the least from the mental health nursing viewpoint, is also the people who have already pre-existing mental health and substance abuse problems. And here we know that for some people, actually the isolation first, when it started, could have been even a little bit less stressful times, and they might cope even a little bit better because of kind of common sense that all people are now having restrictions. But when it keeps going and takes long time, so the worries are increasing, especially while in community and outpatient services, several relationships are not maybe continuing at the moment. There has been some remote and online services available, but it seems that there are also need to develop these and actually the access for technology for some of our patients and clients. So from the Horatio viewpoint, we would like to highlight that we see that there is a need for mental health literacy and competency in all levels, in promotion, prevention, and in care. And we probably need to develop a new kind of cooperation models also, maybe between different services this is highly also dependent on which country you are and what kind of service cooperation there is already. But it might be that we need to bring in the mental health competence in NGOs, more in primary healthcare than today, maybe in social services and other specialized services besides mental health services. We need to have cooperation between different professions in practice, and we definitely need multidisciplinary research and development initiatives and projects. A new kind of approach is probably also from this viewpoint. Our worry at the same time is that now it's the time to kind of utilize fully the capacity and potential of psychiatric and mental health nurses in all these levels, not only in mental health services. So as we all know, the nurses are the biggest professional group in healthcare in general. So we need probably to strengthen the mental health competence of all nurses. And again, there are a lot of differences between countries in this sense. But also the psychiatric and mental health nurses, we need to utilize all their potential also in non-traditional mental health services. Maybe there's a need to develop consultation systems, mentoring, maybe joint clinical supervision, so that there is a kind of ongoing learning process for those nurses and other professionals who are not working in the mental health settings normally. And there are also development needs in mental health services. Probably we need to also check that there's enough mental health staff in different settings and services available, being those mental health nurses or other professionals. And from the mental health and psychiatric mental health nursing viewpoint, it should be remembered that we should utilize all the levels of knowledge and competence, the bachelor level, the master's and PhD level of psychiatric and mental health nurses. So to get the full potential to fight against this joint enemy of us. So there is a lot to do with all for all the professions. Yes, next please. But like also Andrew mentioned, it's highly important to promote and safeguard also the mental health of all the healthcare professionals, of all of us really. So, but we need to recognize especially those who are in risk of fatigue or compassion fatigue and even vicarious trauma because of the PTSD. We should be sensitive for short and long-term consequences and be able to meet these. But we need to also remember that we need to provide some support system already now for the persons who are working in intensive care units, but also in other healthcare services. And we should remember that also the healthcare professionals have other life outside of the work, so they might be in other vulnerable life situations at the same time, which it's again making it more risky from the mental health viewpoint. And we need to also remember, of course, those who are working in mental health services and to be able to provide them support, clinical supervision, and those kind of tools to keep up their mental health. So Horatio is actually launching a statement paper on the COVID-19 and mental health nursing. It will be launched later next week. And I have just gathered some of the points from that statement in this presentation. So here in the end, you can see all our contact details, and this is my time to say thank you and let the next speaker to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Very interesting presentation. Just before you leave the floor for the other speakers, we had an assessment in my hospital where we had 2,000 tests. We observed that the rate of those COVID plus was 4% for our inpatients and 11% for the nurses and caregivers. So we were really struck by the point that, in fact, definitely the nurses, especially those on frontline, were really exposed to the disorder. Because of all these consequences on the psychological well-being of nurses during this crisis, we're quite struck by the point that it was a different type of activity they had during the COVID crisis, much more technical, bit focused on the virus instead of more mental health care. That's probably also is involved in such a huge change of the everyday practice. How much do you see this aspect as being one of the risk factor for the burnout, the fatigue, or even the PTSD that you've been talking about?
Yes, definitely. What we saw in many countries is that the nurses they need to go to work with the infected patients, even though they might get 1 day training, extra training or something. So they needed to go to work in very different settings rapidly. And we are especially worried about the nurses who are in very early stages of their career, and there has been also nursing students working in those kind of environments. And probably some of the audience already see last week, for example, the CEO of ICN, Howard Cotton, was actually tweeting that while there has been now this huge number of people dying globally, we don't actually know how many of them are healthcare professionals, and that's a real scandal. We don't have statistics of how many have actually died because of this. What we know from the mental health nursing viewpoint, not exact statistics, but there has been news that the level of fatigue, the burden has been so hard that unfortunately we have some nurses who have committed suicides also, and probably also other healthcare professionals. So this is a real threat for the mental health of the nurses.
Absolutely. And I like your point that definitely we need data, we need the information, we have to know exactly what are the consequences. So thank you very much, Nina. I think now it's time to get to Christoph Steinbach. Christoph is responsible of the European Federation of Psychologists Association, and we have now more important interactions with this important association with a memorandum of understanding. So I'm very happy to give you the floor, Christoph, for your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Philip. And I will show my slides. Here we go. Thanks a lot for the invitation to join this virtual round table representing EPA. I would like to give a short comment on the perspective of psychology. Might be from 38 different countries of the European continent because they are members of EPA. So it's about the psychological perspective. And when we are talking about interaction, then of course we have to realize that interaction depends on who takes part in this interaction. So it's the client, of course, the psychologists and the members of the other professions. And all of us, we are part of different social systems and environments. And this makes it complicated, complex, but of course also it makes it interesting. And if you ask a psychologist the answer about interaction, then the answer might be it depends. And we see it depends also on the time which we need to overcome the COVID crisis. We are still in it, and the conditions change the longer the crisis lasts. So those are aspects we have to keep in mind. What we learned in the COVID crisis, we learned a lot. Let me show this. We learned a lot. Oh, sorry. Now it goes back. Here we go. We learned a lot about perhaps online consultations, about social psychosocial risks, online teaching, psychological help, and so on. And the point is that we now have to learn about how can we use all these learnings for enhancing and making better our communication and interaction. Psychology is not only clinical psychology or health psychology. Psychologists are working in very different fields of practice, and some questions are related to education in times of COVID, like homeschooling, and other points are about team development and leadership under the special situation of home office, and you have to work in distance, use the internet, and still you have to lead or to take part in team meetings. And this is also a real challenge for the work and the everyday life as well. So we learned a lot about this, and we should think about how we can use this for our cooperation. Another point is that information during the COVID crisis has been most important. Information to the open public, information to other professions, and of course, information from the European Federation of Psychologists Associations to other psychologists. So we learned a lot about how to give that information. We used webinars, and when it comes as an example to online counseling, then we also had a webinar on this. And this is a topic, an issue, which surely is interesting for other health professions as well. So for the future, let's think about how we can open up those webinars, how we can invite colleagues from other professions to join so that we can learn together, which will also strengthen our cooperation in a very good way. In addition, our association had an expert group working on online counseling, our experts on e-health, and they gave some recommendations for this. And this might also be interesting. You see that it will be published these weeks in a journal. So you see the reference in here as well. And now the next slide. I would suggest to have again a look on our statement, on our consensus statement, working together towards an effective and influential mental health workforce in Europe. This is a statement which has been written by different associations. You see them down here on the slide. And it has been written in 2017. And what we could do is have another look on it and think about now, if we see all those different aspects and the ideas we had and the goals we had, the aims to work together, what has changed during COVID-19 crisis. And in this way, update our consensus statement and have something like a guideline to enhance the cooperation in the future. And especially when it comes to the workforce survey, we could have a look on how this changed during COVID. And another aspect might be health policies. Where are we after the COVID crisis with this respect? Well, I would like in the end, I see that as we are now here together on a virtual roundtable, I guess that our cooperation actually is good. The workforces of health in Europe, the cooperation, the collaboration is in a good shape. But still, we can make the world a better place, so we should make our cooperation better. And COVID challenges us, challenges all of us, and as we learned, similar problems we are struggling with. So the cooperation might also help us to enhance the resilience of our interaction and in the end help our clients. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you very much. Can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Yes,
definitely. I like a lot your presentation about all those modifications that completely change the landscape of how we take care of patients. One of the big challenges you've been raising is about this e-therapy, how we moved to real face-to-face therapy, which is the basis, the roots of psychotherapy, and changing it up, doing that on tablets with many people, not seeing your clinician, but also the other patients and the interactions that are so important. It's probably going to find new one. It's not completely new. I mean, we already had some of them before, but doing that systematically for all type of patients, sometimes even starting the process only as a virtual interaction probably has a huge impact. How are you going to dig this aspect? How are you going to try to further understand the limits, the positive aspects, and what we should keep, what we should change? What do you have already some cues about what the development of this type of approach?
Well, I think that one of the experiences is that different groups of clients are easier to reach virtually than if you have appointments in the clinics or something like that. So what we learn is that it's not in a way okay to usually have a negative perspective on virtual communication and virtual counseling and therapy, like it has a deficit in general. So for some groups, for some aspects, it is quite helpful on supporting the process. And we have to learn more about where are the differences in it. Actually, we are challenged as professionals to make a virtual situation for the client that it feels like a real one. So there is a lot of meta competence and reflection needed about the way we communicate in the virtual situation. So we should have a clearer respect and look on it in our training courses for the students, online counseling, online therapy, and further education, and train that in a way, because that's possible.
Thank you, Christophe. I also hope a lot that the progress at the numerical level will also facilitate all these aspects. And I guess that you have an important role to explain the engineers about what aspects are so important for this empathy, the social interaction. So hopefully we will drive this progress in a more fruitful way, and the EPA would be very happy to participate and help you in this aspect, because they are.
Let's do that together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Christophe. I think we have time now to go to George Sterku. He's the president of the European Federation of Psychiatric Trainees. And George, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor. Is everything working fine? Is the microphone working and everything else? Right. So yes, my name is George Sterku. I'm the president of the European Federation of Psychiatric Trainees. We are a federation that represents national trainee associations from 40 different countries. We just admitted our last two countries, Montenegro and Armenia, just today, when it's also our General Assembly, such as life and things in the coronavirus times. Basically, I will be talking about the role of the trainee in the interaction among mental health care workforce in Europe. I'll just share my screen. So, our federation represents a consensus of psychiatric trainee association across the European countries and advocates for what training should look like regardless of country. We have multiple international partners, the biggest one being EPA. So thank you very much, Professor Philip Gold, for inviting us here and being a strong supporter of our federation. Of course, we also work very, very closely with the UEMS, where we are doing our best to help them in gathering information about the training programs in Europe and just working on how to really improve it. Our federation grew in the last basically 30 years from just 9 represented countries to 59 during our virtual forum that's happening right now, basically this year. It really, really took a toll on us, the coronavirus situation, because we had to completely change our forum, where we get to meet everybody from all over Europe and discuss and learn their stories. So basically, what we did in the last month was to discuss with all participants at the forum and organize multiple events in the pre-forum period. And we had invites from Romania, my country, But we also had invites from Lithuania, from Germany, from Malta, from the UK, from Russia, from Italy, from France. And this was just the invited speakers, but we also had multiple other presentations, even from the overseas, from Brazil, for example. And what we did learn was, and the topics of discussion was, are psychiatric trainees obliged to work on COVID wards? Were psychiatric trainees obliged to work on emergency wards to help with triage of COVID-19 patients? Compared to the times before the COVID-19 measures, how much time was spent on clinical supervision, practical training, for example, under the supervision of a mentor or a specialist? And in what way did the COVID-19 measures affected formal training in psychiatry? Basically, this study is still underway and we're still gathering information on it. And we can't really share the data on it until Monday. When
I'll mute myself and then leave it off.
Right. Right, let's get back. So what we did is had this topic of discussion all along the forum. So basically what I'm saying now is not actual data because we'll only have that on Monday once our forum is over. But this is a first-hand, I don't know, talk about our experience or what I learned talking to all of these amazing people that joined our forum, all presidents of the national trainee associations. What we did learn, for example, let me show you on our site what we also did in order to gather as much information as possible during these days. So basically, on our site, if you would visit it, efpt.eu, where you can learn a lot about our federation, we gathered a lot of different country cards where all the trainees could have sent what problems they have in their own country, what we can do to help them. But we also gathered posters entitled to the 2020s, 2030s, what will change in psychiatry in the following year from your point of view as a trainee? What do you think changes? And of course, here we've been discussing a lot of different things, mostly, for example, about psychedelic treatments and also change in legislature. But of course, a big part of it was the management of the psychiatric patients with COVID-19 and how did COVID-19 change training programs or the way you interact with your patients or with the mental health team, basically. So this is just one of the examples. We have about 40 different posters delivered by each NTA. But this is a very good example done by Dr. Pavel Tranchik, which is our past president of the EFPT, and he's the president of the section of young psychiatrists in the Czech Republic Association, and he's also the head physicians of the psychiatric hospital in Bohnice. And as you have seen, for example, in the Czech Republic, the Ministry of Health of the Czech Republic launched different wards for acutely ill psychiatric patients. Right, so this is the way we gather data, and we had this very long conversation, multiple in different nights in different settings about how everything changed. So going back basically to our questions that I presented earlier, 1 second to just share this screen back on the PowerPoint. So regarding these questions, this is the survey that we have sent to every single member country and participant. And again, I will have the data and I will be able to share it because we also have a partnership with EPA on this because of Mariana Pinto da Costa, which chairs the early career psychiatry section of EPA. So through our partnership with them, we will also share this data with EPA. Basically, what we have learned during all these days is that psychiatric trainees were obliged to work on COVID-19 wards. Most of the countries, psychiatric trainees have been changed overnight to fulfilling multiple roles. So basically trainees that just started, there were even countries that in which overnight just finishing their their university, just in 1 week, they went straight to COVID-19 wards. For, I don't know, I think in Poland was it, or I may be wrong on this, but people were fastly trained to intubate, and they received very quick and fast courses on how to act in intensive care units, for example. Basically, in almost every single country, psychiatric trainees were obliged to somehow work on COVID-19 wards, both in the capacity as a psychiatric trainee, but in a lot of different countries, they have actually been sent to even intensive care units or retrained for a pneumology rotation, for example. Were psychiatric trainees work on emergency wards to help with the triage of COVID-19? Yes, indeed, we have been. So this completely resetted the role of trainee in the mental health task force. And not only in that, for example, in Romania, in the hospital that I work in, which is the biggest hospital here, Obreja Hospital in Bucharest, Romania, with over 1,000 beds. And trainees have been sent in a triage to make sure that everybody that joins doesn't have a fever, hasn't been in other different countries that could point out to possible infection. Compared to the times before the COVID-19 measure, how much time was spent on clinical supervision under a mentor or specialist? So this were all affected. This is what we learned from all the trainees. Basically, formal training, everything changed. But this doesn't have necessarily something to do with the mental health task force. So yes, indeed, the training point of view has been completely reset by the COVID-19 setting, basically. And all the trainees have really seen exactly what it is to go through an emergency crisis. And this goes to prove that this part of our development and this part of being a doctor, the first years, when you're a trainee, it just goes to show how flexible we are. Just goes to show how what an important part of the mental health task force we are, and that in crisis times, we get to adapt really fast and we get to take our part, and we are very important. And I'm very happy that Professor Philip Gomez was understood this and invited us here. I would like to thank him one more time for this. Yes.
It is our pleasure to have you on board, because this is you are the future. So definitely we have to be also with the next generation of psychiatrists. You know, George, one of the aspects you've been stressing is the point that a lot of trainees had to get to a new ward type of activity, completely different from everyday activity. In our hospital in Paris, in Sainte-Anne, we had a lot of volunteers. Many of them were in fact asking immediately to be part of it, because knowing that it's a huge crisis and we're going to need a lot of people being on strike. So in fact, we had no one being obliged to, because the number of volunteers was extremely high. Did you have some differences in different countries? Because I know that the level of request might be completely different from one country to the other. We all already know a lot about the difference of the prevalence of the COVID in different European countries. How did you have kind of information and glance on what about differences in different European countries of the level of pressure to get to this COVID activity instead of the usual mental health care?
Right. Yes, we did notice, because how the reason behind me giving you this answer is not necessarily scientific. So we didn't make a survey or anything, but we do have multiple social media platforms. We have a WhatsApp group with all the presidents of all the NTAs and all the delegates, and all throughout the year, we're keeping in very, very direct contact with them, and we got to see direct and very fast reactions to what was going on. And yes, obviously, in the country that were most affected, for example, Italy, we were receiving daily reports. They were saying, look at how things are going here, look at how much work. And then there were other countries that had started to spike the rate of infection as well. they were messaging us, they're making us go to intensive care units and starting our training program in pneumology. And yes, we did observe that in the countries that started to spike and that the rate of infection was higher, obviously the trainees from those countries were being asked or were volunteering to do it, to get retrained and fastly adapt to this new situation.
Thank you, George. You know, these aspects will be developed also in other symposia of the Congress because we have many on them. It's just a huge crisis. Just a very last short questions about the important points you raised on the impact of the courses, trainings. Especially, you know, I have the experience of young ones stopping their training for being an intern to get to from a resident to a researcher for 1 year because they want to have some practice, sometimes getting to a PhD. This year was a disaster because they could not include patients in the most important period of their year. And usually the exams were also completely transformed. Do you have a kind of feedback for the residents on the impact they could have on the, as you said, for the usual training to become a resident and validating the exams, and also for the aspects of those being also involved in research?
Yes, well, two of the questions actually that I presented earlier that is part of our country survey that we send out every year refers to exactly this. We're still waiting for the reports because as I've said, our annual forum is taking place right now, so they still have a few days left. But from my experience, from what I've seen, most of the countries have fully transitioned to a completely virtual setting. All the courses are happening online, and the discussions were really not taking this in consideration much. Like they were focusing mostly on how to adapt, how to do better, how to save the patients. And I really do feel that training per se has fallen or stepped back to a second plane and was not considered as important as to make sure that we stay safe, that we stay healthy, that we have our patients, and that we give our best to adapt and do the best we can for the patients. So, but maybe in the future, this will, once the emergency or the crisis sort of gets managed a little bit better, or we'll learn how to adapt to it better, then probably the training per se will also become more important.
Thank you, George. Thank you. It was very interesting and definitely an important aspect of the activity of residents. So thank you. Then we will get now to Carmen Suarez, who's the second chairman of the European region of World Confederation of Physiotherapists. So it is an important aspect of mental health care, not the most frequently used or the most frequent collaboration, all those, for those happy enough to have it, which is the case for our department, it's really much appropriate and definitely appreciated. So I would be very happy to listen to you, Carmen, about your idea about this interaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Can you see the presentation? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. Now, so thank you, Philip, again, and good morning to all the participants and colleagues to this forum. Firstly, I would like, on behalf of the European region of WCPT, I would like to thank the European Psychiatry Association for inviting us to participate in this online multidisciplinary forum, and to congratulate them also, and especially to the organizing and scientific committees for the organization of this great scientific and professional event. The European region of the World Confederation of Physiotherapy, the organization I'm representing, is an organization of professional associations from 39 countries, and is the voice of physiotherapy to the European and EU authorities. Now we'll start my presentation, in which I will address the perspective of physiotherapists in the mental health team, and especially in the current health situation we are living, the disease due to the coronavirus 19. As we all know, mental health defined by WHO is related to the promotion of well-being, the prevention of mental disorder, and the treatment and rehabilitation of people affected by mental disorders. The WHO's mental health action plans recognize the essential role of mental health in achieving health for all people. Epidemiological studies show that depression, stress-related conditions, long-lasting musculoskeletal disorders, and anxiety affect millions of people worldwide, often having negative consequences for their ability to work and quality of life. People suffering from mental health problems often have somatic symptoms, representing a major group of patients seeking help from physiotherapists over the globe. Physiotherapists in mental health play a key role in the multidisciplinary team and interprofessional care, and their interventions are based on the available scientific and best clinical practice. Physiotherapists in mental health provide health promotion, preventive health care, treatment and rehabilitation for individuals, group and in-group therapeutic setting. They create a therapeutic relationship to provide assessment and services especially related to the complexity of mental health within a supportive environment, applying a model including biological and psychosocial aspects. Physiotherapy in mental health aim to optimize well-being and empower the individual by promoting functional movement, movement awareness, physical activity and exercises, bringing together physical and mental aspects. This definition was developed by the International Organization of Physical Therapists in Mental Health, subgroup of the World Confederation of Physiotherapy, which was established at the General Meeting of WCPT in 2011, and became a milestone organizing from the year-long tradition of psychiatry and psychosomatic physiotherapy. Physiotherapy, mental health care, and psychiatry mostly treat individuals with mental illness suffering from physical disabilities, but also offer additional contribution, given that physiotherapists have the knowledge of human movement. So mental health physiotherapists are working within the psychiatric ward, community health care, and preventive health care, providing evaluation tools, structured approaches through individual and group physiotherapy. The core competency of the profession of physiotherapist is to maximize people's movement potential, thereby promoting health and well-being. There is an increasing amount of scientific literature focused on physical exercises, movement-related activities, body and movement awareness, and well-being for individuals with mental health problems, supporting the importance of physical exercise in mental health and psychiatric rehabilitation. Patients suffering from long-lasting musculoskeletal disorder and mental health problems, chronic pain, psychosomatic disorders, and mental health disorders represent a major group of patients seeking help from physiotherapists. Reviewing existing literature, the evidence shows the effectiveness of physiotherapy intervention in disorder as long-lasting musculoskeletal disorder, which rob millions of individuals of their mobility, function, and painless existence. Long-lasting musculoskeletal disorder and mental health problems are leading causes of disability. People suffering from mental health problems often have body-oriented symptoms like muscle tension, pain, and difficulty with movement coordination, breathing, and concentration, for which physiotherapy treatment based on exercise and functional movement is effective. We also find studies carried out on patients suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, where an exercise intervention is associated with reduced PTSD and depressive symptoms, reduced waist circumference, and improved sleep quality. Studies focusing on eating disorders such as anorexia nerviosa or bulimia show the following findings. Supervised physiotherapy modalities might increase weight in anorexia nervosa patients. Intervention as aerobic exercises, massage, basic body awareness therapy, and yoga may may reduce eating pathology in patients with anorexia and bulimia nervosa, improving mental and physical quality of life on these patients. Also in patients with severe psychiatric problems like schizophrenia, there are an increasing body of research which demonstrates that exercise interventions can improve physical health and reduce psychiatric symptoms in people with major depression and psychotic disorders. Studies show that aerobic and strength exercise and yoga reduce mental symptoms, state anxiety, and psychological distress, improving quality of life. Authors at back and forth in a systematic review conclude that physiotherapy offers added value in the multidisciplinary care of people with schizophrenia. Patients value exercise for the benefit in physical and psychological health and appearance. However, mental health symptoms, tiredness, and insufficient support present substantial barriers for the majority of patients. So exercise programs should be designated to improve their capacities with the necessary level of supervision or assistance for each patient to overcome this barrier and achieve their goals. Oh, yes. With regard to the impact that COVID is having on mental health, widespread outbreak of infectious disease, such COVID, are associated with psychological distress and symptoms of mental illness, according to the literature. Several studies have linked quarantine to negative psychological effects, such as stress, anxiety, anger, and post-traumatic stress syndrome. Although the population at high risk of adverse mental health disorders are patients with COVID, their families, individuals with distinct physical or psychiatric morbidity, vulnerable population, and healthcare workers, also in general population, the role of unpredictability, uncertainty, seriousness of the disease, misinformation, and social isolation contribute to stress and mental morbidity. Following the report of the WHO China Joint Mission on Coronavirus Disease, data on the impact of this pandemic disease on the population are observed, where both its mild and severe forms affect respiratory function. In this situation, the role of physiotherapists has been and is paramount in the acute phase of coronavirus disease, in the intensive care units and in hospitalized patients. But survival from an infectious disease is only the first step, and that infectious disease can lead to long-term impairment, activity limitation, and participant restriction. But there are still questions to be answered and related to the possible consequences of COVID in different aspects, like respiratory or cardiac function, functional capacity, neurological sequelae, or psychological state. Given the possible appearance of these sequels, physiotherapists will also play an important role in the multidisciplinary health team in recovering these consequences of this disease that may lead in lung function and functional capacity. As we have discussed above, there are few studies on the aftermath of COVID at different levels, as well as each approach. In the rehabilitation field, the report of an OC International Task Force to develop an expert-based opinion on rehabilitation intervention in COVID survivors highlights those aspects that we currently know. They highlight also what we don't yet know, as well as establish early and short-term clinical recommendations based on the knowledge that we have so far for patients who have suffered COVID-19. In relation to the impact on the mental health of COVID patients and their families, authors report as common symptoms the appearance of anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress. They raise the need for rehabilitative intervention in COVID patients discharged from the hospital due to sedentary behavior or social isolation. And they recommend that the assessment and subsequent treatment of the emotional and neuropsychological impact of COVID is warranted, especially in view of the prolonged in hospital isolation this patient will experience. Given the magnitude and long-term impact on physical, mental, and emotional health, and awareness of the role and effectiveness of physiotherapy intervention, including the field of mental health, a full incorporation of the physiotherapists in the multidisciplinary rehabilitation teams throughout the disease process is necessary. Mental health physiotherapists can help to improve mental health and quality of life of patients, providing personalized programs of physical activity, exercise, and therapeutic movement while promoting self-efficacy and well-being in psychiatric services. Treatment needs a patient-centered care approach focused on patient healthcare professional interaction to improve health outcomes. Thank you very much, Felipe. And thank you very much again for the invitation.
Thank you, Carmen. It was a pleasure, and definitely thank you for raising all these level of interactions. You know, we are as clinicians, all of us, very convinced about the importance of physical activity, and especially when it's driven by a specialist, because it's a real specialty on its own. We have now more and more scientific evidence about its role on different very severe mental health disorders such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It also had a role on the COVID, and I don't know if you had the same experience in Spain, but we had in France such a huge number of people making their jogging in the streets, not too far from their home, because they thought it was good for their health. So that's refreshing, but also a good sign that people understand the importance of these well-being with their body and also with their physical exercise. But it's not only good news. Physical exercise sometimes can lead to addiction. You raised the point of the benefit for eating disorders, but sometimes also there's a misuse of physical exercise just to lose weight. So this is, for me, one of the very good reasons we need specialists for that. And these physical exercise, they really have to be monitored, follow up, and being taken care of by physiotherapists. And we have a lot of difficulties to find physiotherapists that could work in our mental health disorders. So my question is, what is the image that has the physiotherapist between yourselves about those working in a cardiological department or in a mental health specialist center? Do you think it's the same level of attractivity, of interest, of having this idea that you have a huge impact on the benefit for mental health workforce, exactly as we have in cardiology, or at least in the same range? Is it shared, or is it really the level of the assessment of those physiotherapists?
In mental health or in different settings?
Yes, especially in mental health compared to the other type of somatic disorders.
Oh, for us, it's the same. It's another specialty in physiotherapy. So you can be working in a specific field as respiratory physiotherapy or cardiology in a cardiology service, or musculoskeletal or neurological. But mental health is another field in which we can help patients to improve the quality of life. So there's no difference for us. There's no difference between one specialty to other. During the career, the curriculum, all the physiotherapists know or have knowledge about what a mental health physiotherapist means, or what physiotherapy specialized in respiratory means, or women health, whatever. They have they acquire transversal competencies in these, but when they finish, they have to specialize in one or other field. But all of them are similar for us. So it's similar. It's another specialization of physiotherapy.
Yeah, sure. That's good news to hear. But it's also important, probably, that we do some efforts to make it more appealing for physiotherapists to work in mental health workforce, because we're not all wards do have a physiotherapist. We have a lot of specialties that needs to be there to treat of patients correctly. And my feeling, and that reflects also the level of interactions in the pool, saying that the physiotherapist interactions is not as frequent as the others. So probably we would have to do something, maybe with policymakers, in order to have a more systematic idea that physiotherapists are needed in any kind of strong mental health wards.
And Philip, if you let me
Please.
say, there is another point, because we are speaking about evidence, about the need of being part of this interdisciplinary team, that we have to take in consideration also the patient satisfaction, and it's really high, and be engaged to exercise, even with the barriers we can find. But I think that we have to take in consideration the patient perspective, and it's really high, I consider.
I absolutely share your point. So we will have to work on that, and then your presence here today is definitely with this sign that we think it is a priority, and I'm sure that we can do even better level of interactions in the future. So thank you very much, Carmen, for your presentation. So if you agree, we now could go to the next presentation, which is Naomi Hankinson, who's the Vice President of the Council of Occupational Therapists for European countries, the COTEC. And a very interesting association. As you saw, Naomi, we have a lot of interactions with you during usually, and a huge impact of the COVID. So we will be very interested in your presentation. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you. Would you mind, could you load my slides, Philip? Would that be okay?
Definitely, I will do that.
Thank you. While that's happening, Philip's just given a very nice introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. We actually are the Council of Occupational Therapists for the European countries, and that's defined by the Council of Europe. So we have members who are professional bodies in 31 countries, and that gives us about 185,000 occupational therapists at the moment. Our focus in COTEC is on practice, practice obviously across health, social care, education, forensic, but we also have sister organisations in Europe who focus on education and research, and we're currently moving towards working under the banner of Occupational Therapy Europe. And could I add my thanks as well to the EPA for the invitation. Thank you very much. My first slide, if we could move to the next slide, that would be, can I do that? You've done it. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, this presentation is based actually on the responses that I got from sending out to our members what they'd like me to bring here. And I thought it was very interesting that what I got back was not facts and figures, but very much thoughts and feelings. And I think it just re-emphasizes for us how much people need to tell their stories. And my first slide called Returning and Restoring. Sorry, can we go back one? Returning and Restoring. And that's a picture of an Australian publication, which is we've shared widely across Europe, translating it into several languages. It's a very good practical guide, as you would expect from occupational therapists, to actually managing daily life. We've all been individually and collectively disrupted. We've been personally and professionally interrupted, and some of us are still feeling that more than other people. Have you lost my picture? Not that it matters. This has been a real time of occupational deprivation for many people, and that has resulted in needs which certainly include mental health needs. But another disruption that people wanted me to bring here from the occupational therapy community was something actually George touched on when he was talking about having to be asked to be working on COVID wards. Actually, a lot of occupational therapists from mental health reported that they had been either volunteering or been asked to support acute general hospitals, going to work on those wards. So that was a very new experience to be assimilated. And we're hoping that in a way, though, that will have a positive outcome in terms of understanding colleagues better and some of the stresses that working on an acute ward bring. If we could move on to the next slide, which is titled Reflection, you'll see that this is an image from a publication by the Spanish General Council of Colleges of Occupational Therapy. And in turn, it felt important to touch on reflection because as mental health practitioners, most of us are extremely prone to reflection, either individually or together. Previous speakers have already talked about the importance of supervision and spending time doing this. I think we're already starting to see a tranche of literature on the impact of the pandemic on the population. But the other issue that I want to raise here is it feels as though there's been much more focus on the impact on the workforce. And this does feel new. I'd be very interested to hear others thinking on this. There are actually resources that are being put now into supporting the workforce. Obviously, it's been the more acute workforce that's happened for. But it's again interesting, and will this continue? Will this focus on the fact that the workforce need to be supported, go into the way we work in the future? And I think again, this could be, other people have touched on this could actually result in a new stream of work or a developing stream of work for mental health professionals in terms of their support of other members of staff. I mean, hopefully this will become embedded and a way of working in the future. In terms of my next slide, which is I've called Revising and Reforming, I couldn't actually resist putting up this meme. I'm sure many people have already seen this. In fact, somebody here might even have written it, I'm not sure, but it'll be familiar to people. And it just really brought home to me when I saw this, what a big change there has been in terms of how we work. And again, people have talked about this throughout this session this morning. We've actually embraced virtual meetings. We've embraced virtual consultation. We've embraced seeing socially people virtually. Someone the other day who was working in primary care said to me that this is the most quickly implemented service improvement that they'd ever seen in NHS England. And it's certainly progressed a direction that was already in train. We were already using telecare, we were already using forms of working this way. But I think we've seen this happen and we're not going to revert, are we? We're not going to go back to old ways of working. But in doing that, we need to be very careful to assess that we don't leave behind people who either don't want to or can't actually access technology. We don't want marginalised people to actually not be able to access services or care because they haven't or don't want to work in this way. We've got a whole older population that may or may not, although actually it seems to be that the older population have certainly embraced virtual technology in order to be in contact with families. I think the other thing is there are times that we feel as professionals, as the workforce, that we actually need to see people in person. There's something about that face-to-face contact or that being in a group that we shouldn't lose. And again, it's already been talked about that we don't want to totally lose that. Another issue of a different way of working was people have actually mentioned that in some of the acute wards in mental health, they've actually had to wear PPE, and the difficulty that actually brings in terms of making perhaps relationships. You have to work harder in making your relationships with people. So lots of changes for the workforce. And then in terms of the next slide, which I've called rehabilitation or recovery, and of course it's not or, they are both, whether we're professionally rehabilitation model driven or the service user led recovery process, it's bringing them both together. But many of members across Europe have actually shared their concern about this, and somebody actually used the word earlier, but it's been said to me a couple of times, a tsunami of need that's heading our way. Are we prepared for it? Is it understood that this is coming in terms of, and I would talk about rehabilitation, mental health rehabilitation. There'll be physical rehabilitation needed, but also mental health, and it could be potentially overwhelming. The other thing that I think we need to think about is that some countries are in the grip of recession, and that will mean unemployment, and that is also going to have a major impact on our mental health services. We've had opportunities, though, through this to work differently, and certainly red tape has been cut through in some cases in a way that we've never seen before. So the opportunity to work across boundaries and has been there, and I think that is something we want to hold on to. That multi-sectoral working shouldn't go away. And other people have already touched on this, but there is a real need to influence public health, and I think that's where I wanted to pick out MHE's poster. There's no health without mental health. I think we've really got to get that message home. It's a key message, and as occupational therapists, dual trained, we'd like to think that we can help in taking that forward. We need very effective mental health input into all the sectors. Again, people have talked about this: community, primary care, and specialist services. We really need, I think, to develop our relationships with general practice, because that's where where initially people will be seen, and we need to make sure that people don't end up in specialist services if it's possible to provide services in a different environment in the community. So I think, you know, again, we could see a big case for the input of mental health practitioners into all those areas. Last slide is actually, I've talked about resilience, and this has been a buzzword. I think several people have already mentioned it this morning. I think it was in the poll. We're hearing a lot more about this, and I think in terms of what we're experiencing now, it's a good time to focus on resilience. In a way, building our resilience could be our psychological PPE, our personal protective equipment. This slide just references one resource of many. Many people are now talking about how to develop resilience, and I wanted to bring it here because people across Europe, our members, had shared their feelings of absolute exhaustion, actually, and fear of the recurrence of this. And we know there are going to be spikes. We know there are going to be places where this pandemic is going to show itself again. So I think we do need to be very clear that we need to be resilient. We need personal and professional resilience. Somebody has already, I think it was the lady from Horatio, talked very eloquently about supervision and how much a part of our daily work this should be in terms of keeping people feeling able to keep delivering. So if we can support our service users in developing resilience as well, that would be very helpful. And I think we also need to think about how we can contribute to our community resilience. Our communities need to develop resilience. And if we can, of course, we all know, develop healthier communities, resilient communities, then mental health services will be able to work in a very different way. That's really what I wanted to finish on, apart from stating that or telling you all that resilience just happens to be the theme of our conference, our Congress next year in Prague, to which everybody would be welcome. It should have been this year, but has had to be postponed. So hopefully that means that we'll have a lot more people who are contributing some excellent work. The last two strong messages that I heard from people who got in touch with me about this presentation were, of course, we can do all these things alone. We can all do our interventions alone, we can work individually, but actually we have much more impact when we work together as a multidisciplinary team. And the other message that people wanted to say very clearly was, we deliver best when we're working in partnership with our service users. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. That was a very interesting presentation, and definitely I like the 2 points raised by your colleagues about the importance of working as a team and working together in order to improve the quality of care. I'm a bit curious about what are, at a very practical level, the modifications of the occupational therapies you've been proposing during the COVID. I guess that for the types of activities that are used in every day, a lot of them were completely not possible because of these no connection. what kind of activities did you use, like occupational therapists, during the COVID that were relatively easy to get to these E-types connections instead of real one, virtual versus physical contacts? And which one were completely finished because of these virtual approach only?
Well, initially, I think in terms of service delivery, a lot of the group work was difficult to do, because obviously we work with people, helping them develop their interactions with each other. A lot of our work is on social interaction. So things like actually going out and using community resources and becoming familiar with that became impossible to do. So in a way, I think it was replaced really by looking at how people could structure their day, and get pleasure or get value out of everyday activities. And I think my colleague from the World Physiotherapy Organization talked about exercise, and not just necessarily organized exercise, but just the ability to actually go out supervised from places. But I think a lot of the work that we did was actually looking with people at how they could structure their day at home, and making sure all the general things that very many of you will have been doing for yourselves, but also advising other people, is keeping a structure to the day, actually not slipping into not doing anything, watching television till all hours and sleeping. So keeping some semblance of normal life, but also doing things that rewarded you.
That's nice. Definitely, you know, it reminds me the point that all the information you just gave are much beyond our patients. It's really for the global population, and everyone had to struggle about all these stress and so on. So, for example, you know, at a psychiatric level, the point that you had such bad news very early in the morning about the number of people dying the last day was quite a disaster to begin the day with such awful news, and all with this spread of negative information, which really increased the level of stress. And so we try to give some information to those leading the news and the media that you have to think a little bit about the consequences. And when you're able, as occupational therapists, to try to deliver this message also at radio, TV, media, that could, you know, just help people managing, I mean, all people, not only patients with mental health disorders.
Well, I'm not sure in which countries people were able to do that, but I think, yes, that focus on positive stories as well. I noticed that we moved much more towards looking at people who had been discharged from hospital, as well as obviously reporting on and acknowledging the sadness of the people who had died. But yes, I think you're absolutely right there, that the shift needed to be from focusing on everything that was so difficult, and as you say, often starting the day with that, to some of the good news stories about people who'd achieved. We had a lot of people raising money in various countries actually for health services, and not just for health services, but for health service personnel, the workforce, which was very nice. And again, those very positive stories about people finding ways to raise money to support health was great. Very positive.
Thank you, Naomi. That was a very interesting presentation. So we had a lot of extremely interesting. That was at least my assessment of this morning. Absolutely fascinating. So everybody having ideas of how to increase connections, increase the quality of our interactions for taking care of patients, but also for the global public in a very strange situation of the crisis we just had. We have time for some questions and answers now. So just at a technical level, not all of you are able to raise the questions because you have to be within the list of those being subscribing within the forum, which is free and open, but you will have to be then. But the forum is open to a lot of people everywhere. So don't be too frustrated if you cannot send your question. But of course, we will be happy to take some of these questions and have discussion. So if you want now to send some questions, please do so. For that, maybe, you know, for those speakers that are just there to make a fresh start, if you just open your camera, or I would then be able to see if you are interested in raising a questions between colleagues. So Carmen, George, I think you already have some of these proposal to our question. So Carmen, you were the first, so you might ask a question, please. But first you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. First of all, I would like to congratulate all my colleagues or all the colleagues in this forum. The presentation have been really nice and very productive in this situation we are living. So I would like to know what is for Andrew. I would like to know how do they see or are they working together with I'm going to ask about my field, of course, but how do you see or how many physiotherapists take part in different countries in the multidisciplinary mental health care team?
Andrew, please.
Common, the answer is not enough.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've been reflecting on over the years is we talk in mental health about taking a biopsychosocial approach and thinking holistically, yet there are many aspects that we have neglected. And you've raised in your presentation the aspect of movement and physical care. And I think that's probably one of the next developments that we need to take in. In the last few years, we've become much more attuned to the physical health needs of our service users. But actually, needs for movement and body connectedness are also absolutely important. So yeah, my answer is not enough. And I think one of the things we need to do in our training for all of our professions is have a lot more opportunity for multidisciplinary learning, so that we encourage people to learn together. So we learn with our colleagues in occupational therapy, in physiotherapy, in psychology, whilst obviously maintaining our own important separate professional identities. But actually, teams who learn together work better together, I think.
Always in benefit of patients. So good to hear that, and we can work together. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Very good point. Please, George, yeah, you were the next one for the question.
Right. So also for Andrew, basically the FPT works together with UEMS on a very big project called the Test Your Own Training. I'll share it really fast on the screen. Basically, you can test your own training, and while doing it, you learn a lot about what is supposed to learn in your training period, not just the medical side, but also how to be a manager and a leader and an advocate for mental health. So my question is, I know we've been working a lot on the proposed exam, general exam, but the biggest problem is that the training programs are so diversified and the role of the psychiatric training is so diversified all over Europe. And do you think that now that COVID kind of resetted this whole thing and gave a equal footing, or one thing that all the training programs can be equal in a certain thing, do you think this might help us in our endeavor to create a more uniform training program and an European exam for psychiatry?
We have a queue of questions, so please, Andrew, be relatively short if possible. Thank you.
That's a really interesting question. I think diversity actually is a good thing. And as you look around Europe, we've got a fantastically diverse continent, lots of different ways of delivering mental health services, lots of different ways of being professionals within Europe. And I wouldn't want us to sacrifice that in the pursuit of a sterile uniformity. But I do think that there is elements of standards that we can transfer across Europe. And there are probably some elements of knowledge in particular that we can examine around Europe, and we can agree to a uniform knowledge standard. But heaven's sake, don't throw babies out with bathwater. The important thing, I think, is not to sacrifice our diversity, which we should be really proud of and celebrate.
definitely something we should be able to share your point of view. Naomi, your time for the question, please. Unmute yourself first, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my question, just generally for anyone to pick it up, is unemployment. I think this is going to be a real issue for us. How can we together have an impact on this?
That's a question that could touch upon all of us and all different specialities, because there is, as you said, a kind of a second wave will not be more a virus rather than the social one. We're going to have a huge impact just because of the cost of what we've been doing and what was needed, but which will have a translation into the number of those out of employment in France has been doubling in such quickly that it's really going to have huge consequences. So I like your point. I think we should all together think about what we could do to be completely confident about offering the same service, even for those that are, even with a higher level of difficulties and homeless and no job, and all of them, they will going to need more health and more care. So we have to work on this aspect.
Good. That would be good.
Thank you for the point. Christophe, your go.
Well, actually, Naomi made the question which I wanted to pose, and my idea also then would be if we have something like a survey that we know how the mental health forces changed during COVID and what would be needed after COVID. So that might be also a possibility. So my question now is just a comment. Thank you.
And a comment that on which we can build, because I guess that we would be all interested in the post-COVID period and what does that translate in for the level of care, for the level of suffering, and not only for our patients, but also to the general population. So that's very important point. And maybe for this afternoon, which will be led by Matt, who just joined us. Hello, Matt. That's one aspect for which we should ask also the policymakers, because as you said, not knowing that would be a disaster. So we really have to follow this information and probably make all these interesting collection of data, so we are aware and propose the adequate level of care for this aspect of the disorder. Nina, please.
Yes, I think my question goes mainly to Christophe, but I think it kind of combines us all. We've been talking of unemployment and vulnerable groups, but from the public health viewpoint, this is probably a question for all, actually. So about mental health literacy, because if we all the predictions that we have now about the amount of people needing help, so our mental health services can't really cope, and therefore we need to strengthen the primary care, but we probably need to raise awareness in population in general about the mental health issues, when you need to be worried about yourself, when you need to contact some services, to get that kind of information in the public level. So I was wondering, Christophe, because you just so quickly the 2017 statement and some of those topics, I was wondering if there was something on that one that you were thinking of, but maybe this is actually a question for everyone. Do we have enough mental health literacy among population, or should we do something for that as professionals together?
Christophe?
Well, what I actually like is when in the open public, COVID and what happens with people, with the meaning for them, what COVID has, came up, then usually it was asked about mental health. So we are not out of the discussion. We are, in a way, we are in the middle of the discussion. The other point is what I see, we spontaneously had lots of hotlines from different professions offering support to the public. We had websites and information hubs on the internet from different professions. So I think there has been lots of energy in this, giving psychology, giving our knowledge away, not only psychology, but our professional knowledge away to the open public. What we could do better is we could organize ourselves better, because I think we invested a lot of resources, and that's a good thing, of course, but it might be helpful also for the open public to know more about, or to if we cooperate, to more easily find the information and grab what is necessary. So that could be made better, and we are not done with that. It makes sense to do this also in the end of the COVID crisis and after the COVID crisis, because there are new challenges coming up, like an economical crisis, and we have to think about that. And then this will add to the post-traumatic problems. And so we will see that the information, the literacy, we could do a lot more in that by working together.
Thank you, Christoph. I completely share your point, and definitely an important point. So guys, we've been talking for 2 hours now. It looked like it was so short, but we had so many interaction, and I think very interesting ones. So, you know, in this kind of webinars, when we have a long time, it's important we keep on a bio break, just to refresh our mind and restart our attention process later on. So if you agree, I would propose that we all switch our camera off and everybody comes back at sharp 11:15. So 11:15, everybody's back after a little cup of coffee. Okay, thank you so much, all the speakers, fantastic one, and I hope that you will keep on being there for the forum, because we need your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in a minute then. So welcome back. I hope you enjoy your bio break during this e-forum. It's a privilege for me now to give the floor to Matt Mugen, who's working for Gamion, which is an association which is for us extremely important as representative of patients. And we are so proud to have them working together in our European Psychiatric Association. So please, Matt, the floor is yours, and we will jointly continue this forum. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you very much. Gamion, I'm here on behalf of Gamion, the European Patients Association. And we're representing more than 50 European organizations into about 28 countries with a combined membership of multiple thousands. Now, Gamion has been working extremely closely with the EPA over the last few years. And we wanted this because we believe that the partnership, the interaction between patients and also families with the workforce organizations is essential. There is no good mental health care without good partnerships. And we already developed a few projects to improve this partnership and to work together. Now, this is of course a time which makes it even more obvious why such a partnership is crucial. And although patients weren't mentioned all the time this morning, it was implicit all the time. And what we're so aware of is well, painfully aware of course, the patient organization, that we get constant feedback from our patients, how challenging this time is at multiple levels. First of all, care is disrupted. I mean, we talked about earlier about poor training for patients, poor training for psychiatrists, challenges to the whole workforce. Because of course, many patients at the moment have no access to care. And if they get care, it's diminished in a major way. That at a time that, of course, the need for care is so much higher. I mean, I talk to many of our patient organizations who talk about their loneliness, their isolation, their need for contact, the poverty they suffer. They lose jobs, they lose their family, they lose their friends. And also, of course, what we have to bear in mind is that many of our patients suffer from comorbidities. So many people with psychiatric problems also suffer from diabetes, cancer, heart infarct, which is, of course, a much higher risk of mortality. Now, what we do not know is mortality among our memberships. And I've never, ever heard anyone talking about the high mortality among patients with severe mental health problems. And that would probably be a very important point for improvement of care. So what I'm aware of in this meeting so far already is the need for further work between patient groups, with family groups, but working together with workforce associations to promote better mental health care for all of us, including, of course, what came across this morning is dealing with the anxiety of many of the workforce staff. I mean, what is interesting in this moment that we stand together, not only because we want mental health care, but also because we need mental health services. So I hope we hear more about it in this next session, about the perspectives of many of these organizations, what we can do together. But I hope particularly that we can continue working together in the future in a way that has been already so constructive between EPA and Gamian. So thank you, Philip. Over to you. Let's start the session.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for these kind words. So the next speaker is Mia Manico. She's working for the European Federation of Associations of Families of People with Mental Illness, which is EUFAMI, another actor within, also working within EPA. Just a short remark for those listening to this forum. It is now possible to have your questions. So the first part was more or less questions between speakers, but don't hesitate to send questions, because for this second part, we will be able to collect some of your questions. We already received quite a lot of them because you are so many following the forum. So don't really hesitate to be active. So Mia, please, can I share my screen to show your slides?
Yes, thank you, Philip. So, hello everyone. And I'm very happy to speak on behalf of families today, and I'm very happy to meet you all, even if I cannot see you. And I can say that the COVID really changed the social life, and especially family lives, and especially those affected by mental ill health. And it is something we are talking today, and also more about optimal interaction within mental health workforces. Philip, may I have the next slide, please? Next slide. So very briefly about something about EUFAMI. And EUFAMI is the voice at European level of family members of people affected by severe mental illness. And please see this picture on the slide. I very much like to look at it because you can recognize the countries where EUFAMI has its member organizations, and it's very nice to see it in that way, because very often families feel to be invisible and not very well recognized group. So it's very nice to see it in that way. And also, when I look at this map, I'm considering the family carers, family members' experiences, and how they share their very same kind of experiences in all over the Europe. When they are reflecting and sharing their experiences, they really find it very same kind of. But when we are talking about the family organizations in all over the Europe, there are a large variety of organizations, and I can tell you that EUFAMI feels very important to support family organizations and their activities, especially in Eastern European countries, because in some way this kind of family movement is just commencing in these countries, and there is a huge need for family support. And I also want to mention that family carers, they spend average care for care. It's 42 to 45 hours per week, and we have recognized that 75% of carers are female. So if we look at these family members as a workforce, it really means that there is a lot of female, and they spend a huge amount of hours for caring per week. And if we look at how many working hours they work for as staff members, the mean reduction was 22 hours per week. So quite many family carers work as a part-time workers. This is really something should be recognized in the European level. So we can see family carers as a quite invisible and cheap workforce. And the effects of COVID were very meaningful, very, very large for family carers. And Philip, may I have the next slide, please? This slide highlights the view of individual family member. And if we are talking about optimal interaction within mental health workforces, I have to mention that the carer's journey, it is explained very often as a journey of hope and despair, or it is something like to travel in a roller coaster. There are ups and downs, there are many kind of emotions. So it's really that family carers, they need this kind of individual support for themselves. And if we are talking about optimal interaction, we should meet the needs of individual family members very carefully, and to be heard carefully the concerns of family members, and to be discussed these concerns with family members if possible. And in that way, to increase family carers' understanding about illness, and to support them in their work to support their loved ones with mental ill health. And if we look at European family organizations, there are many kind of activities to provide more information for family carers, and also this kind of emotional support for carers. European family organizations, they organize, as well as, of course, hospitals, outpatient units, and so on. There are this kind of psychoeducational trainings, counseling, peer support. And if we look at this COVID-19 period, it was really large change for non-governmental organizations to transform their support services in another format, and they really developed this kind of educational courses, peer support groups, and they provided these kind of services as online format. And they really developed the methods how to manage stress as a family carer. It was something, it was requested to provide this kind of courses more in the period of COVID. And next slide, please. And EUFAM speaks about dialogue very often. And it's when we are talking about optimal interaction between three groups: patient, family members, and professionals, we really want to talk about this kind of dialogue and it's optimal interaction within these three groups. And I also want to mention EUFAM's Prospect program. It was developed a few years ago, but one part of this educational program is the program for these 3 groups, and it's the topic of this program is to provide opportunities for patient, family members, and professionals to consider further the communication between these 3 groups. And I think so that this could be something really to be developed in the future. It is very great opportunity and a very great experiences when these 3 groups discuss together and they really consider together what could be done in a different way. What can I learn from you, and what should be changed, what we are doing well, and what are the challenges. This is something what we should do more, much more, and I recognize this that it could be something new for me to do more. And then there is the person versus family. Very often family carers, they feel that it's a bit too much patient. It's too much discussion about patient, and this kind of educational training, what is, for example, this prospect program, it really makes possible to consider more this kind of social contexts, and if possible it is very useful for everybody, I suppose, and especially family carers, they raise these topic very often. And also this kind of communication between these 3 groups makes possible to communicate early enough as a family or inside this kind of group, how to discuss when a family member recognizes more symptoms and where to contact if a relapse is considered. This kind of very practical things has to be discussed within family. And we recognize it very strongly during the COVID period that families do have a lot of needs for additional support, and it's very important that there is easy access to these support services. So this slide telling more about trialogue, it's telling more about social learning and all participants, how they could have an active role in this communication process, and it's really something we should consider to be used as much as possible. And next slide, please. I also want to show you this slide because it highlights really the needs of family carers. And if you look at these amounts of needs family carers have, you can see that there is huge need for information. For example, 88% of family carers, they would have more information, and 83% of family carers would like to have more emotional support. This is really something. When I look at these statistics, I think that there is a huge need for support, and I hope that we can make some change in next few years and really to change these amounts together. And this is this is some kind of invitation to invite all of us to consider these issues more. I do not have any advice how to do it. It's only to provide information and to really to listen carefully the needs of family carers and to give answers to their questions. But this is an invitation to all of us. And next slide, please.
You have 1 minute, Mia, because we
Yes,
have other
yes, I'm just I'm just finishing. Yes, so it seems that more support for European family members will be organized as online in the future, and it was really good experiences what we got organizing this kind of online courses. But it's of course up to the age group, for example, and support content, and we always have to consider what is the need of family care and which tool supports these needs. And we have seen that the caring and loneliness, it's one very big issue, and this is significantly higher than that seen in general population surveys in Europe. So we have to consider that if there is already a high amount of loneliness amongst family carers, then always online courses may not be the first priority. Maybe there are some needs for face-to-face meetings. So really to consider when and to which age group, for example, to provide online and face-to-face opportunities to meet each others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mila. I'm here, of course, on behalf of Gamian, and I know you know Hilka very well, and we've got a very strong partnership. And I think this forum is again a good opportunity to show that patients and families need to work together, because there is a mutual interest, just as it is with workforce associations. I think you certainly need to be involved in the future in these discussions, and I think your presentation made that very clear. Philip, shall I continue introducing the next speaker?
Absolutely, please.
Because I'm very happy to introduce Professor Helen Harmon, who is the professor of the World Psychiatric Association, and particularly good as a speaker at this event, not only because you're president of the World Psychiatric Association, but also because of your special expertise in mental health promotion over many years, which is so relevant at the moment. So we're looking forward to your presentation from a number of angles, Helen. And over to you from Australia, I guess.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much, Matt. And great pleasure to be with you and with Philip and with the group. And I'm very pleased and honoured too to be following Mia Manikol in the panel, and appreciate the invitation from Philip and yourself and EPA and Gamian to this forum, to me and to WPA. And as you say, Matt, we've worked together over the years. So in a sense, we've all been preparing for this emergency in one sense or another. It's and we need to think of the opportunities as well as the terrible effects that it's having for people, and the great difficulties that many people are facing. And it's been very special to hear from all our colleagues earlier today about the experiences of working together, for the ways that each of the professions are working to think about the current situation. Now, I'm trying to advance mine. Could I have some assistance with advancing the screen? There we are. Thank you. So the World Psychiatric Association has a very special vision, which, as we read it now, looks quite modern, but it is something that was developed in one form or another, very similar to this 70 years ago when WPA was founded. So a world in which people live in conditions that promote mental health and have access to mental health treatment and care that meet appropriate professional and ethical standards, integrate public health principles and respect human rights. So to someone with an interest in mental health promotion, as well as the development of mental health services and health services more broadly, this is a very compatible vision and indicates the way that I think many people on the forum have been suggesting too, that we're not here as a health service bubble, we're not here as individuals, we're here as members of teams, members of organizations that need to find a way to work together and also ensure that we persuade the policymakers and decision makers and politicians that we need to consider the social determinants of mental health and of well-being and loneliness, as Nia was saying. And we need action on broader principles, and perhaps here's where there is more of an opportunity for us as a field. So WPA now and in the recent years has been expanding the contribution of psychiatry to improved mental health worldwide. So we as professionals of all types, including psychiatrists, we have a particular role as advocates as well as clinical experts and researchers and teachers to ensure that we reach those who face adversity and disadvantage and don't arrive at our clinics or hospitals. So that's how do we equip ourselves to work in this way? And how do we work with others in that regard? I'll come back to the partners in that in a moment. So it's the work's been based and will continue to be based on collaborating successfully with other organizations and working with psychiatrists to use their expertise and to use it in ways that some have, but many haven't been up until recently, to working across a range of community settings with schools in slums, in cities, in emergency settings of all types, and with and using the skills that they have, but other skills as well, to work in teams and to understand the principles of advocacy and policy making to make that a useful process. And the work, in a sense, began some years ago with the program on partnerships in mental health, when WPA collaborated, as EPA is doing, with family caregivers and with people with lived experience. And we published a decade or almost ago a set of recommendations on working with those groups. And we had people with those backgrounds joining us in this activity. And it was, everybody insisted that the beginning should be to say that human rights is the basis of successful partnerships for mental health. And then it was very much about nothing about us without us, so that laws and policy and clinical practice that are relevant to the lives and care of people with mental disorders need to be developed in collaboration with service users and carers. At the time, we adopted a terminology that was the least worst, and we agreed to go beyond the questions of terminology for that time, and to come back to that as we go forward. So these 2 recommendations and a further 8 that build on those are now included in the WPA's ethical declarations. So what have we been doing? So WPA is a association. We have 140 member societies in 120 countries worldwide, and represent possibly about 250,000 psychiatrists. So we have a large base, but many acute needs among those groups. Of course, the largest societies are doing a magnificent job, including several in Europe, in providing resources, opportunities, facilities for their members. And WPA's role has been to seek mutual support and to collaborate, particularly among the larger, better resourced societies, to support those that have less and are seeking assistance. So we've set up an information exchange, one that I think many organisations, including the EPA, are doing similar things. And we've included resources in a range of languages from our own member societies and from trusted partners, including the World Health Organization and EPA and others. And we've making use of our online capacities for education in particular topics that people need in this area. We've our Standing Committee on Ethics and Review, chaired by Professor Sam Tiano, has created an ethical guidelines for psychiatrists, particularly for their use in a number of countries with their governments, so that they can advocate for the continued possibilities to work with their patients, even when resources are so thinly stretched and wanted elsewhere. And how is it that, how can people with mental health problems as well as COVID-19 be best treated, and how do services continue? And what about when services have been requisitioned for care for people with the virus? How do we get those back? How do we make sure that resources are maintained in such a poorly resourced part of healthcare anyway? So as I mentioned, the work has been emphasising the possibilities for collaboration and mutual support with the help of groups of experts from around the world. We're creating some basic guidelines on telepsychiatry and an advisory service where people from societies can have online guidance and advice. And we're setting up a similar group of people with expertise in health services. We've provided emergency assistance to colleagues in Nepal for their reaching out in augmenting their capacities in child and adolescent mental health to go to schools, to provide the extra outreach that families and their young people need. And we've provided assistance in Ukraine, where there's been a particular combined emergency with COVID, as well as some other internal financing crisis. Our focus is, at the same time, as many of you have said, is to borrow the WHO phrase, building back better. So how do we take the opportunities to build hybrid services in the sense of e-mental health and telepsychiatry combined in an optimal way that may ultimately emerge from, we trust, the increased application, research and evaluation of services now, in a way that makes the most of the outreach provided by those services and combined with mental health and health services and community worker support. Working in mental health teams with all the groups that we've heard from, particularly from nurses, psychologists, occupational therapists, social workers, and I think that physiotherapy is a very, very important addition to a team. And working in primary health care, building on the competencies that the primary health care workers have and need. And we've just published some work combined with Wonka, where we have worked with the World Association of Family Doctors to consider what are the competencies that primary care doctors need, and how do psychiatrists view those, and how can they make the most of those or help augment them. And community workers, the idea of shared care, training, support, supervision for lay workers as well, particularly in the least resourced countries. The other thing that we're doing is thinking about responding to emergencies in the future. So we have set up a council of a dozen of the larger, better, well-resourced societies in WPA to advise our response now, and to continue as a body that can be called on to manage further resources. And finally, to comment on
yes, 1 minute, please, Ellen.
Yeah,
thank you.
As we see as our role is to strengthen the capacity of communities to respond to mental health needs through these collaborations with service users or people with lived experience and family carers, working with health and social practitioners and lay workers, community leaders, schools and other community areas, hybrid services. And WPA is working on supporting alternatives to coercion in a significant project with member societies that we trust will be part of the post-COVID world in a continuing way, and being prepared for emergency responses. So thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for pushing, but we have a different presentation.
Yes,
but it was very interesting, and I really appreciate this point about the interaction between countries. So different types of questions, of prevalence, of responses. So it's very important we learn from each other. So we will have time for questions a bit later within the forum, but I would like to give the floor now to Hélène Rocard, a data analyst at the OECD. A very important aspect, because this is where usually we have the best data in order to analyze the problem. So Hélène, I'm very pleased to welcome you and give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start by sharing the screen. So normally, sorry for that. Okay, good. Here we are. So thank you again. Good morning or good afternoon. I will present today OECD perspective on mental health problems. The OECD has been working for over a decade on mental health, and our publication, Health at a Glance Europe 2018, included a chapter dedicated to mental health. In this chapter, we highlighted the prevalence of mental health problems, the composition of most at-risk population groups, the estimated costs related to mental health problems, as well as mental health policies. I'm one of the co-authors with Émilie Hillette, Gaëtan Lafortune, and David Morgan. And I will base my presentation on the estimated costs presented in this chapter, and I will speak about costs of mental health problems in the near future. Grasping the full picture of costs is key because the bulk of costs are actually indirect ones, less visible than those borne out directly by the health system. And so my presentation will highlight the need for better prevention and care. And just one thing, because before I move on to the next slide, I just want to say that in my personal life, 2 people among my loved ones are on the autistic spectrum. So this is just to say that I really realize the very concrete effects of stigma, underdiagnosis, difficult access to quality mental health care, and the burden carried by informal curers. So I represent numbers, but this is much more than numbers. In 2018, we showed that the economic burden related to mental ill health can rise to up to 4% of GDP. And this was equivalent to 600 billion euros in 2015. Around 1/3 of costs are spending on health services. Just under 1/3 of costs are from social security programs, so namely sick leave, disability, and unemployment benefits. And over 1/3 of costs are indirect costs related to the labor market. By country, the estimated costs range from 2% to 2.5% of GDP. In Romania, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic, to over 5% of GDP. In Denmark, Finland, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And these variations are mainly driven by the share of people reporting mental health problems, as well as differences in the social security benefits provided to people with mental health problems and different levels of spending on mental health care services. For example, Nordic countries tend to have more generous social security benefits compared with Central European countries. And these estimates date back to 2015. What would be the cost of mental health issues in the near future given the COVID pandemic? And to answer this question, the first step is to understand the cost drivers of mental health problems. It was estimated that over 1 out of 6 people had a mental health problem across EU countries in 2016. So I will, we are already seeing an impact of the COVID outbreak on mental health, but the scale of the impact likely differs by population groups, as you know. Health workers are suffering from the psychological strain of responding to the outbreak, which may have an immediate and lasting impact. And for mental health service users, the outbreak and measures to control it has made access to services much more harder. And the general population is impacted too. Data from a recent survey in Belgium, which is shown here, shows that depressive disorders have sharply increased from 10% in 2018 to a rate of 16% during the lockdown. Additionally, the survey found that people between the ages of 16 and 24 were among the most affected. The prevalence of depression has tripled in young women and quadrupled in young men. And this effect appears to differ based on socioeconomic and employment status, based on Belgium and French data. And this finding is in line with the distribution of mental health issues that we see in normal times. In France, an online survey representative of the population showed that the prevalence of psychological distress was observed in 33% of respondents, and 12% of whom have severe psychological distress. If being exposed to the virus is a risk factor, the conditions and consequences of the lockdown seem to play the most marked role. Certain segments of the population are more at risk, especially women, people living with a chronic disease, those with low social supports, those confined to housing over-occupied, and those whose financial situation has deteriorated because of the COVID crisis. And so these 2 surveys suggest that the overall prevalence of mental health issues might be higher in 2020 in at least some EU countries, while safety measures may reduce access to mental health care. At the same time, EU countries are facing epidemiological and economical challenges of different levels. And countries are implementing policies to help protect population mental health and ensure access to services. So some have expanded phone and online mental support service. including dedicated support for healthcare workers. Countries have switched to providing services via telemedicine where they can, although this is not always appropriate for users or services, and that's why it's critical to maintain safe access with enough staff and PPEs. So now, given these new inputs, what could be the cost of mental health problems in the near future? While it is too early to draw any conclusion, we can unpack together the cost drivers. So first, the direct costs borne out by the health system. Overall health spending may be impacted by reduced access to care, but also potentially less financial resources. The COVID pandemic has triggered the most severe economic recession in nearly a century. Estimates of the OECD Economic Outlook show that we won't be back to 2019 economic level before at least 2 years. Estimates of the OECD unemployment rate range around 9 to 10% for 2020, compared to 5.4% last year. And little recovery in 2021, especially if a second wave of infections hits before year end. Yet in many countries, virtually all EU countries, funding or part of the funding is mostly based on social contribution of workers or taxes. So maintaining financial resources is to a large extent a social and political decision to make. Funding health systems is critical in facing a pandemic. Now, the second main cost drivers, social spending. For this category, we need to know how much more social spending will be related to mental health issues in order to provide sound estimates. For example, we estimated that 37% of disability benefits were related to mental health problems, based on the available evidence from 6 countries in our publication, Fit Mind, Fit Job. Right now, it is too early to know the share of people with mental health problems among those receiving social security benefits, and whether this share has increased or will increase. In addition, there are a lot of unknowns related to the current economic situation. Here again, maintaining financial resources is to a large extent a social and political decision to make. Third, indirect costs related to the labor markets. Productive life years are lost because of mortality due to suicide or other mental disorders. In addition, people with mental health problems are more likely to have lower employment rates, greater absenteeism, and lower productivity when at work. While it's too early to know the share of people with mental health problems, first evidence in Belgium, France, and Italy suggests an increase of mental health problems, as I showed in my previous slide. If actually, based on the 2015 model, if prevalence of psychological distress and depression were to increase by 2 percentage points, then that would mean additional costs of very roughly 56 billion euros through indirect costs related to the labor markets alone. And this rough estimate highlights that the economic recovery will depend on a mentally healthy and productive workforce. And so all in all, this small analysis suggests that maintaining or increasing financial resources is to a large extent a social and political decision. And here is a takeaway I would like to leave you with. The costs of mental illness may be high, but they are not inevitable. And more can be done to reduce the costs and improve people's lives by intervening early in an integrated way and making more high quality services available to all of those in need. And just before I finish, and in the interest of time, I won't go through this slide, but I want to let you know that
you got 1 minute. You got 1 minute. You got 1 minute. Perfect.
So I just want to let you know that we are working to build more information about mental health care and policies. That we have 3 main publications coming up. The brief on the impact of COVID-19 on mental health, planned for release by the end of this year. OECD Council recommendation on integrated mental health skills and work policies, which should be launched next year, and the mental health benchmarking, which is planned for release in early next year. Thank you. Over for me.
Thank you, Aline. That was great. And actually, you come up with some very important insights, because what you actually show is that population burden is likely to go up. The number of people requiring support will go up, but actually the budgets are likely to go down, and mental health services may well be struggling to sustain themselves. They were in for a very, very rough time, and I thought you made that very, very clear. I also hope that you can bring out your publications very, very soon, because they're highly timely. And I hope that, speaking on behalf of GAMI and the Patients Association, but I'm sure also on behalf of EPA, that we would love to be involved in some of these activities, because they're so important at this time, and the key lobbying tool. So thank you very much. That was very insightful. Thank you. Now, happy to present the next speaker, with Simavi Vahib, who's chair of the EPA Council of National Psychiatric Associations, so representing the many psychiatric associations from across Europe. Simavi, over to you.
Thank you. I'm putting on my slides first. Well, sorry. Yes. Well, I should say good afternoon and hello everybody from Izmir, Turkey, with very warm welcome to all of you, because it's around 40 degrees of Celsius in Izmir nowadays in these at noon currently. I thought that there will be many sessions in this virtual congress about COVID-19 pandemic and consequences on mental health care, etc. So I'll try to focus mainly on interactions of mental health workforce mainly. No doubt that specialized professional workers are crucial parts of mental health care services. Specialization and diversity of the mental health care workers reflect complexity of mental health and mental health care, new improvements in understanding and intervening these complexities, efforts to respond unmet needs, and implementation of new developments. On the other hand, working together and efficiently requires scientific principles and information coming from different disciplines, such as organizational psychology, social psychology, sociology, management, and more. And core concepts are interpersonal, interprofessional relationship, and teamwork. There is significant amount of scientific information guiding mental health workers in their teamwork, interaction, and other interprofessional issues. On the other hand, world is changing and new problems and needs emerge to be discussed, studied, and understood in this multidisciplinary field. Problems, barriers, negative issues, on the other hand, positive factors facilitating improvement, and finally, translation, dissemination, and implementation of evidence-based teamwork principles into practice. We all know very well that there are basic team dynamics: open communication, effective coordination, efficient cooperation, and high level of interdependence. Also, competencies, teamwork interventions, and performance measurement strategies and more. I believe, at least hope, that pandemic has deepened our understanding of importance of these basic elements of interaction and teamwork. And I want to add only two elements to those: working together while physically distant, and most importantly, with increased solidarity. I believe that the future of interaction among mental health workforce will improve on all these elements and values. There could be some possible conflicts and barriers on this road. which might derive from defensive positions of professional cultures, neoliberal transitions of mental health care systems, insufficient financial allocations to mental health, rising of populist and more authoritarian politicians and leaders, and non-scientific attacks to the field. I will ask several questions to guide us and understand possible factors which might be influential on reshaping interactions of mental health workers. What have we experienced during pandemic? In hospitals, in intensive care units, nursing and rehabilitation houses for elderly, stress, pressure, workload, adaptation of teamwork for new conditions. Have we reached all individuals who needed mental health support, like quarantine at home? Shall all methods and instruments used during pandemic sustain in the future? How had the pandemic affected psychiatry services and teams in different European countries, in different systems, in different cultures? The future, what will shape the interaction within mental health workers? Of course, primarily scientific developments and improvements in the field. Developments started long before pandemic, like technology, digital mental health, telemental health, and more. Changes in health financing and healthcare systems, and finally, developments which caused and imposed directly or indirectly by the COVID-19 pandemic. There are many scenarios, as you know. We do not know which is closer to the truth and will be sustained. However, following developments are with us nowadays. Specific need for and availability of remote services like telepsychiatry, telemental health. Significant increased need for mental health support of people and vulnerable groups, preventive, supportive therapies, drug treatments, etc. And of course, as we are discussing throughout the day, economical, social, moral, and other consequences. Due to organizational and cultural diversities, Europe has opportunities and challenges with regard to interventions for improved interactions within mental health workforces. We have to communicate and understand these diversities and sensitivities to work for better interactions within mental health workforces in all European countries. Council of NPAs of EPA has 44 national psychiatric associations as members. Main psychiatry organizations in 40 European countries, representing psychiatrists mainly, and other mental health workers in some. Bidirectional functioning organizations from EPA to NPA and vice versa. Competent in national, local, authentic, and cultural issues and sensitivities. Crucial organizations in contact with local and national mental health stakeholders, and many more opportunities for Europe-wide policies and their widespread implementations. To conclude, I have one simple proposal. We may come together in a committee consisting of one member from each European professional organization of mental health workers to work on the issue continuously and extensively from practice to training to facilitate communication and collaboration, reshape the future of interactions positively and together. Importantly, we have most, if not all, mental health workforce representatives here in this forum, and I hope this forum will have positive impact on improving the quality of interaction and coming out from pandemic with new vistas, opportunities, and actions. Thank you, and with hope.
Thank you, Simavi. Very, very clear and definitely reminding us of the role of the National Psychiatric Association. I completely agree with your point that the NPA is a very nice platform in order to further understand the differences between countries and how we can try to understand how we can face the COVID crisis in the most appropriate way. We will have time for discussions a bit later on, but just to keep the timeline, we're going to have Nicoline Tamsa now from the, as a policy officer from DG Health and Food Safety from the European Commission. So thank you, Nicoline, to get the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, and good morning, or good afternoon, I should say, to you all from Luxembourg. And I am trying to share my screen with you at the moment. Where we are. It was going very well when we tried this. Yep, it's working, hopefully. You can see my screen now.
Perfect.
Excellent. That's really great. Thanks very much. So thank you again for inviting me here to liaise with all of you. And it's been an absolute pleasure and for me to listen this morning to all the really interesting contributions. My name is Nicoline Tamsma. I work in Luxembourg here at DG Santé in the unit that's responsible for the health program and for chronic diseases. And mental health is part of my portfolio. So what I will try to share with you this morning, and I will try to catch up a little bit on the time, is to let you know what DG Santé is doing in supporting mental health, both in terms of member states and NGOs, in a more general way, and also some recent work that we've started on COVID-19. So basically, the main element of our current work on mental health is to support best practice implementation, and we're co-funding that through our current health program in the annual work program of this year. We're basically trying to support what member states themselves have identified as being very relevant to them. So the good news is that I can skip some of my challenge PowerPoint slides, because obviously we just had a really fantastic presentation by the OECD colleague, who OECD is working very closely with DG Santé to develop snapshots of how the public health in Europe, its current state of affairs. And so she has shared some of the information on the 2018 State of Health report. And so not only will you all be familiar with the challenge of mental ill health across the EU countries, but she's already explained how this impacts on costs. And of course, costs are an economic issue, but we're also very aware of the costs this has on patients and on their families and loved ones. Well, COVID-19 has presented us with a new challenge, of course, and it's important to underline that the Commission is very aware that this impact and the mental health impact of COVID is basically on all of us, on us as citizens, as patients, but also as healthcare workers, as young people and old people. And earlier this morning, I think there has already been quite a few people that have identified various groups of citizens that have been affected in different ways. And it's good to keep that diversity in mind. So the European Commission can build on more than 15 years of European efforts in the area of mental health. Since 2005, when the Green Paper on improving mental health was first published. And I think we should also say thank you to the people in Finland, because they have been very, very strong advocates of mental health in the European agenda ever since 1999. So that's good to keep in mind. But anyway, so since 2005, we've had a Green Paper. We then had a European Pact for Mental Health. That was in 2008. And then we had a joint action, which really is a structured collaboration between member states and the European Commission. And that joint action led to what is called a European framework for action. That was really about what can we now do, knowing what are the key challenges. And then in 2018, we had a European compass that gathered good practices and also looked at policies in member states. So building on that, late in 2018, the member states' health ministries, they come together in something that might not be so familiar to you, but it's called the Steering Group on Promotion and Prevention, and it has a longer name even, but I will spare you this. But this is a key instrument for DG Santé to liaise with health ministries on a lot of different health issues and their priorities, but also to identify what kind of good practices they might want to learn from each other, what themes are important for them to learn from each other, and how can we scale up good practices. And of course, these good practices, a lot of them on mental health, you know, we're actually fortunate that because of the compass and the previous work on mental health, we actually have identified a range of good practices already. So in the steering group, the member states said, yeah, mental health is important to us and we would really like more good practice learning happening on this. So we organized a marketplace at our joint research center in Italy, in Ispra, and member states could come and actually talk to good practice owners. And then we asked member states, health ministries, which one they were most important to them, of highest relevance. And so there's now 4 good practices that we will be rolling out through a joint action. This is what GA says in my slide, and also 2 projects. So I'm really delighted because all in all, this means that through the annual work program, our health program of 2020, we could free up more than 8 million euros, which might not sound a lot, but the health program, the current health program, it actually is very small in European terms, and 8 million is a lot. So we can support a joint action which will roll out 2 specific interventions, one on suicide prevention, which was developed in Austria, and one on health system delivery, which was developed in Belgium, which is very much about how to support community-based systems. And then through 2 different projects, we hope to roll out the I Fight Depression intervention and also a housing first intervention, which focuses on housing for people with mental ill health, quite serious mental ill health problems. So this is what we will do anyway. And it's an indication that mental health really at the moment is at the forefront of some of the Commission's public health action. Now, something that is more fitting into today's theme is that we, of course, realized the huge issue of mental health and COVID. And we also saw that a lot of your organizations were already quite soon busy trying to gather expertise and supporting your members, and on your websites linking to the first documents on guidance, also from the OECD or from WHO and international actors. And what we wanted to do, and what the Commissioner also wanted to do, is to make sure that we can support you as health and social stakeholders, not just in the area of mental health, but also stakeholders working in the wider health and social field, stakeholders working with young people, with old people, to gather your expertise. And so we created a network space on our health policy platform, which is a virtual community of more than 6,000 participants already at the moment. And we invited quite a few of your organizations already to join. So you have a place to share resources and expertise and address knowledge gaps. And I really, really, really hope, I mean, today's already, you've mentioned a few times, let's come together, let's work on this together. And I really hope this health policy platform will be helpful for you. We already have 50 participating organizations, including OECD, including UNICEF and WHO, but also including some national actors. So I'm really pleased with that. It met last Wednesday for the first time. at which point it was also clear that we might not have a first webinar in July yet, because we will be currently gathering innovative practices that we could showcase in a webinar, so it will probably be September. But it really is very much at the heart of your theme for today, which is about multi-sectoral collaboration. So we will have different kind of organizations participating. So I think it was Mr. Steinebach, but also some other people today that have stressed how important it is to work across different sectors and disciplines. So I really hope that this platform space will be of help to you. And I want to thank the EPA already, but because I know they've been quite strong supporters of this, but also Mental Health Europe and a variety of other stakeholders. And I'm really hoping this will be of help to you. So I think that would be my contribution for the moment, also in given the time. And I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Damsna and Nicolien. I think you're Dutch, aren't you?
I am, certainly.
Yeah, we share that. Thank you very much on behalf of Gaming as well. Can I just make one observation? Because I know the history very well, which started with the Ministerial Conference in Helsinki and a very strong partnership with WHO, also involving Gaming throughout, which is also present at most of the European Commission meetings with member states. That seems to have been fallen away. And I hope that the patient voice can be heard again at the European Commission, involving them in some of these meetings, because their contribution has always been very, very valuable. And I have to say, very respected by member states.
Well, I don't recognize this at all. I mean, Gaming is on board in this health policy platform. We've invited them specifically. Our director, John Ryan, attended a meeting in the Parliament in February. So to me, that's a new observation, and I wouldn't recognize it at all. And I think patients, of course, are very important. And our commissioner actually is a very strong advocate of patient involvement, not just in terms of mental health, but also in relation to cancer and NCDs. And she's meeting with patients an awful lot. Also with the European Patients Forum. So, well, I don't recognize your observation.
Oh, good. In which case, correct. And I apologize if indeed we're already so closely involved. In which case, I just want to reinforce how important it is. It hasn't come to me that is indeed part. But of course, especially in times like this, with so much stress everywhere, so much pressure, I think the partnership is more important than ever. And I think also the leadership role of the European Commission is again, extremely important in this kind of partnership, and very happy that it's moving forward after a period of let's say suspension. So keen to have heard this from you, and delighted you take such an active part. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At which point, Philip, I'm happy to pass over to you to lead the question and answer session. Can I actually make one point? Because Simai Vahib was talking about his suggestion that there should be a group of workforce associations moving forward discussing this. That group, of course, already exists, co-led by Gaming together with the EPA. So move it forward. And Nicolien, I also hope that the European Commission can take part in such a workforce group, looking at some of the issues that is affecting patients, families, as well as workforce associations. So on that point, over to you, Philip.
Thank you, Matt. I think that the whole forum was a fantastic way to get these interactions and raising the points of so many aspects. So the time is relatively short, but I think we definitely need to take some questions from the audience in order to have these kind of interactions. Because Hélène, you just had this presentation. I would like to pick up one of these questions that is led to you about the additional tools or resources that countries need to improve for interactions between mental health workforces. How do you see that in the post-COVID time? Do you see that there's a possibility to really change the field about this kind of interaction? So Hélène, please.
Apologies, do you mean Eileen or Hélène?
Oh, Eileen, I'm sorry about that. Yes, Eileen, it's about you. Sorry for the pronunciation.
No, I was just checking. I think that right now, at least at the OECD, what we would much appreciate is additional comparable data, so that we can better understand both system capacity and how well systems are or are not holding up to the extra pressures, and in order to make to provide some evidence-based suggestions. That being said, the COVID brief and will take stock of the policies that have been implemented, and the mental health benchmarking will also point to promising policies to improve performance.
Thank you, Aileen. Thank you very much for this interesting point. There's another question, in fact, to this time, Helen Herman. This time is about the interaction between countries. We had this example in Europe, which was so fascinating for us because, for example, some of those that were not able to be sent to ICU because of a restriction of place were sent and taken care of in another European country. So really working together, which was really confronting. Do you have examples of between continents worldwide collaborations for managing these resources for mental health care? Because at the WPA, you have this whole world approach. We can allow to give some example of this kind of collaborations.
Yes, well, thank you, Philip. I think this is going to be an important way forward. As people have said, there's a very difficult period ahead for people with mental health difficulties as well as for the providers. And what we've been doing is we have set up a special grouping of the best resourced and the regional leaders, if you like, in our among our associations, and they have generously agreed to come together and meet and consider needs and think about joint action. And I mentioned a couple of countries where we have already offered assistance. We've provided some financial and some in-kind support. And another example is in Central America, Caribbean. A couple of the major societies in Latin America have been working with the smaller countries and thinking about needs in places like Nicaragua, Haiti, and then about joint ways of doing that. Now, we haven't come to the point of finding out exactly what will happen, but there are other areas like my own country in Australia and New Zealand, looking at some of the needs in the Pacific, countries like Papua New Guinea and others. So I agree with you, this is the way we need to be thinking, and setting up some opportunities for a multinational group of people, for instance, as I mentioned, as providing an advisory group for that can interact with societies that wish for help in telepsychiatry implementation.
Thank you. And the other question I receive is for Nicoline. It's more about money. You know, we all know that crisis makes crash down our assets for many aspects in many countries. Nevertheless, as you've been also raising, and Eileen also, the need is going to be increased, not decreased. So how are we going to cope with that? How DG Santé see the difficulty of a financial crisis, which is something touching all aspects of life, including mental health care, and the point that probably we're going to need to increase the care we're delivering. So how do you propose we manage these difficulties?
Well, let me say two different things. First of all, I think I would like to invite all of you to be concrete about the kind of things you would need. So not necessarily about the money, but for instance, you, Fami, said, you know, we need more support, which is quite understandable given the pressure on families. So it would be helpful to understand what kind of support that would be. So this is just a more general invitation. Now, going back to money, the European budget runs on a 7 years cycle. So at the moment, we are at the end of the current cycle. So the projects that I was talking about, they will be funded through the last annual work program of the current program. And the health program has always been, you know, very modest in size. Now, because of COVID, you might have heard that there will be a lot more money in the next, or this is at least what the Commission has proposed. There will be a much larger health program if the member states agree. I mean, so this is still under decision, and so not only will there be a much larger health program, but one of the three objectives of that health program will be support health systems and health workforce. And of course, this can take a very holistic approach. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be about physical. So there is one of the three, you know, we're talking about a 9 billion programs. It's a totally different animal. And so that's just a new health program if it gets approved. And so that should also provide very new opportunities to strengthen mental health services or integrated services or health promotion. And I know these programs are very boring to read, but I would really already invite you to take a look at that. Now, in addition, there is a whole lot of other instruments, not run by DG Santé, but also through other DGs and other policy fields. And actually, there you can find more, even more support for funding for health, also through the European Social Fund, or even the European Investment Bank. And what we are doing at DG Santé increasingly is to work with member states' health ministries to inform them about all these opportunities. So I know this is a boring issue, but it's very relevant. Money is relevant. And I think now, never than ever before, we're trying to work in synergy with colleagues in other DGs to make sure that also the other opportunities that are available to support health in Europe are being tapped. And we've only recently met with the health ministries in this famous steering group last week to inform people in the health ministries about all these opportunities. So that's what we're trying to do. So I really think that there's good opportunity also to identifying research opportunities. What are the kind of things that we need to know better? So this is really a good time. It's a bad time for mental health maybe, but there's also a good time in many different ways to see how European instruments can support mental health.
Thank you, Nicolene, and we will cross fingers that we get some success and support, because you saw so many willingness to work together and improve the care we're delivering, and so financial support usually is absolutely needed, but it's very nice that apparently it looks relatively positive, and we will also stay optimistic. Matt, you want to, maybe you received some questions that I didn't see, or you want me to start making the conclusion? Open your mic, please. Unmute.
I received one question about telepsychiatry, and it's important in the future, and also the reluctance of patients to take part in telepsychiatry. And I would say that that's only partially true. Gaming is actually developing quite a few telepsychiatry approaches, networks with our members, and many of whom are very keen on it. Because what one always has to be so careful about is that nothing will work for everyone. We should not look for a magic bullet that will support everyone in every situation. If telepsychiatry only supports 50% of people with needs, only give them an additional bit of a shoulder to lean on, that's well worth doing. So the fact that indeed many people do not like telepsychiatry, prefer interpersonal contact, understandably so, does not mean that we should reject it. It is an important way forward, particularly for the younger generation.
Yes, and that's also a point where the between countries heterogeneity is huge. I mean, Helen is there in Australia. You have to do that because the distance is so high. I mean, they already use it for a long time. Maybe Christophe, you have already some feedback about this aspect because you've been working on this e-health approach for a long time. So, how do you respond to this?
Well, I think with what we learned, what we know already is, of course, not that everything is good for everybody. So we have to be very selective and very careful. On the other side, it's also not only about the competencies of those who take part in the virtual dialogue, but also it's about the infrastructure, which has to be well set up. And also, of course, we have to keep in mind not only the tools, but also legal aspects. We have to learn about that. We can enhance that. We shouldn't go back to normal without having a close look on the chances in that. What is positive? How can we use it better? But as it was told in the chat, there might be a marginalization of people who don't have the tools, who don't have internet access. And there we have to be very careful and sensitive and think about what are then appropriate forms of support, and also how can we in a way make sure that everyone who would like to have help virtually can use it.
Very good, Matt. I think it's a bit time now to conclude, because we are a little bit late, but not so bad, I would say, for the first e-forum we had at the EPA. So I would like first to thank all speakers, because it's really so refreshing to see how many possible collaborations we can have. My feeling from this forum is that we had a fantastic support from the Commissioner and the DG Santé, thanks also to Nicoline, which is a very good sign that this kind of increasing network organization of our mental health care is the good way to go. That this is how we're going to be able to react to this kind of incredible crisis. I like also the point that with these OECD information, we know that the economy is a major actor. So we do have to know exactly what are the financial consequences immediately, but also on the long term, and how it will translate into an impact on the mental health care. And so all of these has to be really functioning together in order to be fruitful and really having an efficient reaction. So our roles as clinicians, but also especially within the European Psychiatric Association, is to find new ideas, new initiatives, learn about what the others have been doing and what could be then the kind of all organization modification that will have to be learned and included now in our model. So I really appreciated this forum. Thank you again for all speakers. And don't forget that during the European Psychiatric Association, we're going to have many meetings around the COVID, and all of them will be extremely fruitful to learn about these lessons. It was also a very good aspect to share this forum with Matt. Matt, thank you very much. And I give you the time just for now, the last word. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. And again, thanks for organizing this in partnership with Gamian. I think it sends all the right signals. I got 2 points to make. One is a general point. One is a point relevant to everyone participating. The general point is that at times of greater need, at times of such a massive increase of depression, there is always a risk that the people with greatest needs are marginalized because their voice is not heard. We hear a lot about depression, about anxiety, about stress, which affects, well, probably everyone in the community. We actually do not hear much about people with severe mental health problems who are highly vulnerable and highly marginalized. We have to bear in mind proportionality. I'm not suggesting we neglect the people with anxiety and stress, but I think that we should concentrate a relatively high proportion of resources on people with the highest needs. I think that is one point to make. And that cuts across. It cuts across employment, it cuts across benefits, it cuts across mental health services. My second point is a cliche that always challenging times create opportunities. I hate these kind of cliches, but there is some truth in them. And what I found is actually a tremendous amount of solidarity and consensus this morning about work groups across intergovernmental organizations who all are pulling in the same direction: patients, families, psychiatrists, nurses. And we got a platform here to work with. We already started tentatively and think there is now a time that we really have to stand together and come to an agreement about what our priorities are and lobby for those. I mean, Nicoline was making that point herself. If we continue to be divided, nothing will be achieved. We need to come together, identify what binds us, what our priorities are, and lobby and advocate those together. And I think this is a great starting point, Philip. And I think we should not lose this opportunity, build on this, and convene quite soon with the organizations to take this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, everyone. I think we can close down this forum and thank all of you. Thank you also for the technicians, because I think no major incidents have happened, and that was really unexpected, because usually it's always a bit tricky. Thank you, all of you, for your participation, and I hope that you will all join us for the EPA Congress, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.